Hi there, my name is Ulrich, your furry musician known as DayMusic, aka the Paw Inspector, whichever you want to call me is fine, and welcome to my tutorial series on ZGame Editor Visualizer. The goal of this series isn't going to be for me to make a full deep dive into everything that ZGame Editor Visualizer is capable of, unfortunately. There are some effects that involve external hardware that I don't have, thus I have no clue what they do. For those effects, I will recommend sources where you can learn more about those. Aside from those, I will try my best to cover as much as possible amidst this video series. But before we can get into any of that, we need to start with the basics. Welcome to FL Studio 2025. If you're here, you probably already have a basic understanding of FL Studio and know your way around the music production side of it. So let's get into the video production side. I have my mixer tracks on my second monitor here, so I'm capturing it independently so that I can bring it up and hide it as needed. We're going to start off by loading the ZGame Editor Visualizer plugin on the master track, for reasons that I will probably cover later. ZGame Editor Visualizer, which I'll also call either ZGE Visualizer or just ZGE Viz for short, is, well actually I think I moved my plugins around to better fit my desired organization, so if you have the tree view for your effects menu, ZGE Viz is either in the visual or miscellaneous categories, otherwise in the simple view or category view, look for ZGame Editor Visualizer, or press the Z key and it should open it for you instantly, if it's the only plugin you have starting with the letter Z. When opening ZGE Visualizer, this is what you will see. Two windows, the main plugin window that just says ZGame Editor Visualizer and what mixer track you have it loaded on, and the preview window. A little side note that I think fits well here, ZGame Editor Visualizer gets its name from a completely standalone program named ZGame Editor. From what I was able to understand, ZGame Editor, as the name implies, is a lightweight game development program, meaning it can be used to make very lightweight games. Additionally, you can apparently use ZGame Editor to create game objects and effects that can be used in ZGE Visualizer. I have not investigated much prior to this, however I am intrigued by it, and I may give it a look to see what can be done with it and how it can be used in ZGame Editor Visualizer. Maybe that will be another video in the future. If any of you would like to see that, let me know in the comments. Back to ZGame Editor Visualizer, as always, the plugin wrapper options are all the same. In the top left are the plugin options. I prefer working with my ZGE Viz window detached, but if I do that while capturing the FL Studio window, you'll see that it disappears. So I'm using display capture to capture the entire screen so it will show regardless. Next is the detailed settings button, which doesn't really do anything for us here. Over on the right are the presets with a list of presets to choose from, which personally I've never used any of. As you can see, I've started making my own presets. By the end of the series, I hope for you to be able to make your own presets as well. Lastly, there are the captionize, maximize, and close buttons, of course. Yes, that's right, captionize and not minimize is what FL Studio refers to this button as, because technically, unlike most system windows, it doesn't fully minimize the window, it just turns it into this little bar. You can also get weird results if you right click instead of left click, so be careful. Below that are the main tabs, including the main tab, which is your primary workspace, the add content tab where, well, you can add your content. Next is the settings tab, which is more technical, so I probably won't talk about it too much. It contains various settings for MIDI inputs, DMX output devices, and something about internal controllers, which I wasn't quite sure what it did until I started experimenting for this video, so we'll cover that more later. The Surface tab is a newer addition it seems, as there doesn't seem to be anything on it in the official ZGE Visualizer manual. It looks like it's another control surface similar to the Control Surface Effect plugin or the Surface tab in the Patcher plugin. I suppose that means you can create your own knobs and sliders and use them to control various parameters within ZGE Visualizer. Actually, I might look into that more myself. I don't remember what it was that I had the idea of making easily customizable, but I didn't realize this tab was here. I think this may have been what I was looking for, but now I don't remember what it was. Also, the Surface tab has its own presets button for you to save and load your own presets. I don't know if these are carried over from the other Control Surface plugins or not, however. Lastly is the Debug Log tab. Another self-explanatory one, this tab shows an output log of information for reference should you encounter any issues. This tab offers the options to enable/disable the debug log, and display normals on meshes, which if you don't know what that means, stay tuned as I will be covering 3D meshes later on as well. Looking over at the preview window really quick before delving into each of the ZGame Editor Visualizer tabs specifically, you'll see that there isn't much going on here. From right to left this time, you have the close and maximize buttons of course. Between that and the captionize button, however, is a full screen button. If you want a bigger preview of what you're working on, you can use the maximize button. But if you're like me and the black borders get on your nerves, the full screen button makes the preview take up the entire screen. To exit out from full screen, you can press pretty much any key, except for the escape key for some reason. You can also enter and exit full screen mode by pressing enter. Beside these buttons is the preview resolution dropdown. By default, it should be at 100%, but you can lower it if you're experiencing lagging or frame drops while editing your video. Now, mysteriously, between the preview resolution and this lock icon here, you can see what is very clearly an empty space, but this is actually a toggleable button. Hovering over this space, if you look at FL Studio's hint panel in the top left, it says Show Transparency. Clicking that should change the black background of the preview window to a checkered pattern that is actually quite useful, not only in showing you the transparency of whatever elements you're working with, but it also follows the aspect ratio you have set for your video. So when you're trying to resize the window, instead of loading a basic template image to use as a reference like I have previously been doing, you can use this view to quickly resize the window to your liking while ensuring it's the correct aspect ratio, so that you know where your boundaries are more easily. The lock icon next to that is a toggleable setting that ensures the preview window stays open even when the main ZGeViz window is closed. By default, closing the ZGeViz window also closes the preview window, of course, but if you aren't working with a lot of monitor space, you probably want to make sure you have enough room to work with, so minimizing the number of windows open at once will probably help that. Beside that is a drop-down menu. It sets whether the preview window is previewing the final output or a buffer layer output, which I will be going into in great depth later in this series. Buffer layers will get their own video, and for good reasons. If you click on this drop-down right now, there'll be nothing here since there are no other outputs other than the final output. If you click on the To Buffer button on layer A here, you can see the output for that layer will pop up here. In all honesty, I wasn't aware of this before making this tutorial. This would have come in handy a few times, and you'll find out why in that video. Lastly, there's another drop-down that lets you resize the window to a fixed size. It comes with presets for 16:9 aspect ratio resolutions, 1920x1080, and 3840x2160. You can select custom size to input your own resolutions. Make sure it's formatted correctly. Number, lowercase x, number, no spaces. If you put it in wrong, the window will default to its smallest size, which is the same if you select resizable. I believe this acts as a failsafe should you make the window too big and find it hard to resize back to a reasonable size. When you put in a custom size, that size stays there as a selectable option in the drop-down window. Oh, also, it looks like if you change the size of the preview window with one of these options, it makes it so that you can no longer resize the window manually. So that's what choosing resizable does. Of course, it makes the window actually manually resizable. Who would have thought? When working with ZGame Editor Visualizer, before you can really get into using any of the effects, you need to add the content used therein. So we're going to start looking at the Add Content tab. Upon entering the Add Content tab, you'll be greeted with admittedly a lot of options, more tabs, and a bunch of options to add things. I will try to cover them all, but let's start from right to left in this tab this time, starting with the Video Cue Points. We're starting with the Video Cue Points tab because I really don't want to have to talk about it. I remember it giving me a lot of trouble when I tried using it myself, and for this tab I will actually refer you to one of FL Studio's own tutorial videos that I feel covers it well. It's a bit of an old video, but I feel like it does a good job at demonstrating this tab's use. In short, let's say you want to make one of those videos where you chop up bits of the video to make a song. You would extract the audio from that video and import it into SliceX. Set markers at the points in the audio that you want to chop. Then, if you drag and drop that audio from SliceX into this text box, you'll see numbers that correspond to time data in that audio clip. Alternatively, if you already have a piece of audio saved as a WAV file that you know already has the regions you want, you can press the button at the bottom here. From there, you would add the video in the Add Content tab and enable Sync Video with Song Position. And just in case, for improved sync, turn on Enable Video Preloading. Then load the video in the main tab into an image or HUD image effect, more on that later, as well as a video controller effect under internal controllers. Load the video file as the image source for both of those effects. This is where it starts getting a bit complicated. In order to control the audio from those cube points, you will need to run MIDI information into ZGame Editor Visualizer, but SliceX doesn't have MIDI output. In the channel rack, you would need to add a MIDI out as well as a layer. Keep the layer active and select the MIDI out and SliceX plugins either by clicking and dragging the select bars beside them, or click one and shift click the second one. With them selected, press Set Children in the layer, and you should see that whenever you press notes in the layer, I don't know if it's layer plugin or layer effect, but in the layer, it will trigger both the MIDI out and the SliceX. We're almost done. Lastly, you want to make sure ZGame Editor Visualizer is working on its own MIDI port, so as to not interfere with any other MIDI devices or inputs you might have. For this demonstration, since my MIDI keyboard is on port 0, I will set ZGeViz to port 1. In the MIDI out, I will also set it to port 1. The channel corresponds to which layer in ZGame Editor Visualizer is receiving the MIDI information, and since there are 16 channels, I believe that means there are up to 16 layers that you can control per port. For the video controller layer, it is layer B, so I will set it to channel 2, and you should see when you send MIDI information through the layer effect, the position slider should start moving along. If you have large regions in your audio that you want the video to play through as you keep the note held longer, keep the play option selected. Otherwise, if you want choppier chops, say for drums or something, deselect it and you will see the video plays more only when the note sends the initial impulse. And with that, I have tricked both you and me into talking about the video cue points tab. Huh. Well then, let's move on, shall we? Next up is the Meshes tab. As previously mentioned, ZGame Editor Visualizer iterates off the game development engine ZGame Editor, thus it can load simple 3D objects. But unlike most game engines, it doesn't support most 3D object formats. If you click on Add Meshes, the File Explorer will pop up and you will see in the bottom right corner all of the supported file types: 3D Studio File, .3ds, OBJ Files, .obj, and of course ZGame Editor's own ZGEmesh file, .zgemesh. Also, I would like to point out, if anyone at ImageLine happens to be watching this video, it says ZGEmesh files with 2 eyes in the drop-down. I don't know if it's supposed to say that, I would imagine not. I don't know if anyone knows that it says that. But the joy of clicking everything while preparing for a tutorial video means you get to look at things much more closely than most people would ever look at. I have here some OBJs and 3ds files so that we can look at both of them. Unfortunately, unlike the images and videos, you cannot drag and drop mesh files into ZGeViz. I'm not sure why, but you can at least select multiple files at once and load them all in. Once loaded in, of course, there's the Remove Meshes button to remove them. You can either press the Select All button at the bottom or Control-click the ones you want to select multiple and remove them. We'll look at these other two options in a second. To quickly demonstrate these meshes, I'm going to open a HUD mesh effect. It's the simplest way to load a mesh as far as I know. Stay tuned for later in this video when I find out just how wrong I am. We'll look at other uses for meshes later. As you can see, here is my PopPad mesh. Well, one of them. It's a bit small because I wanted to use these in Tabletop Simulator, and generally speaking, you want 3D game objects to be small and scaled appropriately. I can use the size slider to make it bigger, center it a bit with the position Y slider, and I can use the rotate Y to get a good look around the mesh. If you're familiar with 3D modeling or 3D objects, you'll notice that it is shaded flat, meaning all of the faces are quite prominent. I can change the material parameter here to be shaded smooth, and that's more how it should look. There are a few other options here: wireframe, flatten wireframe, point, and X-ray. I believe these are more for the visual aesthetic, so know that these are here and maybe you can use them to make epic visuals. As I'm writing the script, I left the mesh on point, and I grew to really like how that effect looks. Also, the X-ray effect looked pretty interesting, I think because it's your standard Fresnel effect, kind of like if you remember how Casper looked. Which, I wonder. Yeah, there you go. You can sort of make a fake toon shader effect if you layer a mesh in X-ray mode over one shaded smooth. It's a bit iffy, but it's something. Now let's take a look at the 3ds files. Huh, what's happening? That's right, I turned the size up for my tiny paw pads. That's fine. I'll click the size slider to reset it to the default, as well as the rotation and position to center it back. And, it still looks pretty big. I can change the size to be smaller, of course, but now's a good time to look back at the Meshes tab and enable the Auto Scale option. You see, it's much smaller now. Almost as small as the paw pad was, but actually it's slightly larger. Even the paw meshes were auto-scaled to be larger. That's because autoscale sets each mesh to a set scale to ensure it is visible and further editable. So you can see, these are much more manageable now. But you know what, I'm getting bored of this default white color. As with most things, you can change the lightness of the object with the slider, turn up the saturation to add more color, and change the hue to, well, change the color. Going forward, these will be known as the HSL options, hue, saturation, and lightness, or HSV, hue, saturation, and value. These are the same thing. Since this is a 3D object, it is also affected by light. So if you want to get a better view of the object, you can mess with the light hue, light saturation, and light lightness. If I scroll through the loaded meshes, you can see the color settings carry over to each mesh. But wait, one of these meshes I loaded is called VRChat. I assume that means it should already be red, right? Let's see. Back over in the Meshes tab, let's turn on with colors, and meshes will load with whatever colors they're baked in with. Let's look at the VRChat again, and, well, it's orange now. Which I guess is kind of red, but you can see, when I move the color sliders, it isn't affecting the mesh anymore, because it can't override the baked in color. Oh, and also the rabbit now has colored eyes. You can still change the light colors, of course. If you want, you can pause this video and use this time to play around with some of the mesh options. If you don't have any 3D objects to mess around with, there are a few websites where you can find them for free. I recommend Sketchfab. You can find free 3D objects there, some paid of course, but you can filter just the free ones, and you can download and play with them here, as long as they're OBJ or 3ds formats. When you're downloading an object on Sketchfab, it will ask you what format you want the object in, so make sure to toggle one of those options. There are also other places you can download 3D models from. Check those out as well if you aren't familiar with modeling your own 3D objects. Next up, we're going to talk about the Text tab. Welcome to the Text tab, the most misleading tab so far. Sort of. As you can see, there's nothing here. Yet. At the top, it says the text type here is displayed in text effects such as text draw. This is where I feel the tab is a bit misleading, but not like it's giving you wrong information, but more so it's just leading you in the wrong direction. Let's look at some of the text effect options. The one it mentions is text draw, which of course is in the text category. Among these text effects are also the mesh text and text true type. But let's load the text draw effect first just to see what's going on. So you see, the majority of the settings are your standard parameters, alpha and color sliders, transform sliders. The bottom half is where the text starts to become important. And to look at that, let's go back over to the text tab and input some text. At the top, it also says macros, author, title, comment can be used in the text. So let's use those, and I will show you how to use those. I'm actually going to put 2 lines of the comment macro because I would like to demonstrate something. If you look back at the preview right now, you should see it says author, but without the square brackets. The macro is working correctly, but there currently isn't a set author, so it is defaulting to the word author. If I move the text line parameter in the text draw effect, you will see that it reads the content in the text tab per line. Simple enough, right? So the next line says song title, again because the title macro is working, but the field isn't filled out, so it defaults to this text. And same thing with the comment macros. So where do we fill these out then? Up in FL Studio's menu panel, open the options and select the project info. You get the project credits window. Alternatively, you can press F11 to open it as well. Here you can immediately see the fields we're looking for. Title will be tutorial project. Author is day music. And I'm just going to put a couple lines here for the comments. This is a test. I love pause, I guess. I don't know. I don't really use the comments much. I used to use it more to remind myself of things before closing a project, because if you look in the top right, it says show info on opening. If you've looked at any FL Studio project demos, which if you've ever grabbed any of FL Studio's
lifetime free updates,
each big update usually forces one of these demo projects to open on first launch. So you've probably seen the info panel that preambles the project. This is how you get that to open for you. So if you have any information you'd like to remember before closing a project that you prefer to remember before starting it up again, you can set that up here. Personally, I remember using it for this old abandonware plugin, Eddie Roll Orchestral. It's a nice orchestral instrument plugin, but because it's so old, it doesn't save any edits I make to it, like turning off the onboard reverb. So I would tell myself to remember to turn off the reverb and change whatever instruments I may have changed, things like that. But let's go back to the text draw effect. Back in the text draw effect, you can already see in the preview window that the fields have been filled. If I move the text line slider, I'll be scrolling through the different lines that I've set up in the text tab. You will see, however, that only one line of the comment section is showing up, so keep that in mind when using the comments macro. If you want simple on-screen text that fits these macros, you'll be fine. But if you want to have on-screen lyrics, that'll take a little more effort, and I have a dedicated video planned for that later in this series, so stay tuned. So let me replace these macros with more direct text. There we go. Let's keep looking at the text effects now. The text draw effect also has settings for transforming the letters specifically. This effect also has some glitch effects that you can mess around with as well. The blend parameter has two settings, mode 1 and mode 2, and from my testing, it looks like mode 1 is an additive blend, which is more obvious on lighter colors that aren't white. Mode 2, I think, is just the normal mode, which means it won't blend unless you change the alpha. Lastly, there's the font slider, which I save for last, because this is important. The text draw effect comes with 7 preset fonts that I do not know the name of. Each font is pretty flashy and stylized, and the last font is, well, yeah. Also, it should probably be mentioned that you can load in an image with this effect, but I'm not too sure what that does, as any image I've tried to load, even simple texture images that I thought would work, seems to break the text. It might be for if you want to load your own custom fonts, loading it as an image file with all of the letters laid out for it to read, kind of like a sprite sheet, but for letters. Let's look at the other text effects. Mesh text is pretty much the exact same thing, but even simpler. Again, it has color settings, transform settings, extra transform settings since this text isn't 3D. You'll notice, however, the mesh text effect doesn't just mean that the text is a 3D mesh, but you can also load in one of the meshes you have prepared. So let's do that. I'm going to use one of my PAW meshes. And down here, I'm going to move the text line over to one of the lines with multiple words. And you can see it renders your 3D object between each word, because you can also create a circle effect with this mesh text effect by using the straight/circula slider, and the diameter slider changes the size of that circle. Now let's move on to two things simultaneously. The text true type text effect, which will also bring us to the HTML tab, since it says the text type here is displayed in the text true type effect. Looking at the effect first, your usual color and transform settings are here as usual, except for the size option. This single line mode option, I cannot quite tell you what it does, other than if you enable it, it shows you your text in the text tab. So we're just going to enable that. Likewise, the text line slider does the same thing, moves you through different lines in the text tab. I should mention now, if I haven't mentioned it already, that most of the parameters can be automated. So if you are wanting to create a lyric video and you're just here for a quick reference as to how to do that, putting your lyrics line for line in the text tab, then automating the text line of any text effect is how you would do that, of course. But stick with me to the end of the series, and I hope to show you better options on how to make on-screen lyrics. The inverse mode option also inverts not just the text, but the content beneath it, so be aware of that. If that is the desired effect you want, you should probably use that in a buffer layer, which of course keep watching the series for my video covering those. But now what is so special about the text true type layer? Well, as the HTML tab implies, it supports HTML code. That being said, I'm not going to pretend like I know much of anything about HTML or coding. I just know some simple things here and there. For example, you can use open bracket B close bracket, open bracket /B close bracket to make the text bold. Here is where you would also change the size of the font using open bracket font space size close bracket. You can see also that this tab comes with the text line macro already. I believe that is what enables the text line parameter to work in this tab as well. Over on the right, it actually gives you some example of HTML tags, I guess, is what it refers to them as. And then at the bottom shows you an example of something you can try. And for some reason, I'm not actually able to copy the example code. I don't know if that's just me or not. But like a good cooking show, I have the code already prepared here. And there you can see what all of that looks like. Also, the HTML tab has a little color picker in the top right, which will input the hex code for whatever color you pick. Again though, I don't quite know what the single line mode option does, because turning that on doesn't quite stop this from happening like I thought it would. But it looks like if I replace one of these test lines with the text line macro, it still only affects that line. So I'm just assuming the single line mode option just enables the text line macro for this effect. Now if you've been paying attention closely, I've been jumping around the topic of font a lot with these text effects, because as you see, the basic text effects don't really favor custom fonts. Even this text true type effect, it says here on the right, the font TTF name could be any font in, and then it gives you a directory where FL Studio stores its fonts. And then it also says system fonts. But what if you wanted to use those fonts? Well, I suppose you could shove your custom fonts in that directory, but then I think you would need to know the exact name of the font to use in the HTML font tag. Wouldn't it just be easier to be able to select from a list of fonts? Well, let me tell you which text effect I have been using for years now. Under the HUD category, at the very bottom, there's HUD text. Loading that in, immediately you'll see that there are way more settings for this one than any of the other ones. Your usual color and transform settings, text line is here too of course. You can also append numbers to your lines if you want. So if you have an empty space in your text that I definitely added here for this reason, you can just have a counter that you can automate. If you put a space before a line in your text, you can number each line. Or if you want to indicate which number of an album the track is, you can format the line thusly and automate that for full album stream videos. But I mean, at that point, you could also just type the number in yourself. So I think the best use for this would be just a quick counter or something, because the place value slider changes how many digits are in your number. Below that is what we're looking for, a font dropdown. Now immediately you might notice that yours is very limited compared to mine. It doesn't have all your system fonts for some reason, but that's fine. Remember that folder that the HTML tab told you your fonts were? Well, that's unrelated. Or at least now it is, I think. I'm pretty sure that used to be where the fonts go if you wanted to add custom fonts for this effect, but instead it is in your ZGame Editor Visualizer folder for this effect directly. Wherever your FL Studio is downloaded, the file path should be somewhere in Program Files, Image Line, FL Studio 2025, or whatever version you're on, Plugins, Fruity, Effects, ZGame Editor Visualizer, Effects, HUD, Fonts. If you want to access your system fonts in this plugin, I recommend copying them to this folder, and any custom fonts you want, toss them here as well. When you're finished, you should only need to restart ZGame Editor Visualizer by completely removing it as an effect, then re-adding it, but you can be extra certain your changes take effect by restarting FL Studio, after saving your project of course, if necessary. When you load the HUD text effect again, your fonts should be there. Below that are other customization options for your letters, font size, blur for a nice blur effect you could automate as well for transitions, alignment settings, spacing settings. Two parameters to take note of are the build up from and build up to, as they can be used for a nice effect for lyric videos. If you want a more abstract effect, you can have the text be obfuscated using the random amount, random speed, and random type options. Random speed animates the effect, random type changes the list of characters the random effects pulls from. Lastly, there's the is selectable option, like most HUD effects offer, but unlike those, I couldn't help but notice this one doesn't seem to do anything. At least in my testing, I couldn't get it to work, so I'll cover what that does later in this video. And that's pretty much everything for the text and HTML tabs. For the last of the add content tabs, we're going to be adding images. Or are we? Welcome to the meat and potatoes of ZGame Editor Visualizer. What does that mean? I don't know really, I don't think I've ever used that colloquialism before. It pretty much just means that this is the main content, because what is a video without the visuals, right? And there are a lot of options for visuals, so let's get started. First is add pictures, so that you can add pictures. Clicking it opens your file explorer. It supports PNG, JPG, JPEG, BMP, SVG, ILV, and GIF formats. You can also drag and drop these files in this area to add them more quickly. If you upload the wrong image, you can select it here and click the Replace button at the bottom to pull up the File Explorer again, and you can replace it with whichever one you want. Add videos so that you can add videos. Clicking it opens your File Explorer. It supports WMV, AVI, QT, MPG, MPEG, M1V, MOV, MKV, and MP4 formats. You can drag and drop video files in as well to add them more quickly. If you want to replace video files that you've added, however, the Replace button will not work for that. If you select a video file and press Replace, the File Explorer will open again, but it will only show you all of the supported image files. I don't know why, it's been like that for a while. To replace a video file, you just need to remove it down here and then add the correct one. Be aware that if you want to have a sort of slideshow effect in ZGame Editor Visualizer, you can do this by automating the image source parameter. The mesh parameter can be automated as well, but the audio source parameter cannot be automated. These two parameters rely on the content in their appropriate content locations, so if you're adding and removing or moving content around, know that it will affect how these parameters are automated, as the numerical data will change or something. I don't know the technical details behind how automation works, especially for things like image sources. Also, an interesting little side note I discovered while putting this tutorial together: you can also drag and drop images and videos into your workspace on the main tab directly, and it will automatically create a basic image effect for you with that image and video loaded, as well as add it to your list of content. I discovered this by accident and didn't really know where to fit this information, so I just decided to add it here. Let's move on. Next, there is Add Webcam. Clicking it pulls up a dialog box in FL Studio where you can select your preferred webcam from a drop-down menu of all of your installed webcam drivers. I'm going to select my VIII camera. I don't entirely know why you might want to add a webcam into ZGame Editor Visualizer, but then again, I'm here to help you make music videos or music visualizers with ZGame Editor Visualizer. But I'm sure this has far more functionality, potentially for live performances as well. So if you know anything about those applications, let me know in the comments. Something to note about the webcam, however, in my testing, I was only able to get it to function well with the frame rate set to 30. My webcam is 1080p 60 quality, but trying to load in the webcam at 60 FPS made it very choppy. 15 FPS works as well, but it looks like it's 15 FPS, of course, so if that's what you're going for, I believe that worked well. 30 FPS works for a smooth output from your webcam. As you can see here, I chose my VIII output, of course. VIII's webcam driver has a green screen background that you need to chroma key out, which I will show you how to do so later in this series. But just know that yes, you can do that here as well, but let's move on. Add window as an internal window from FL Studio to your video project. When you click on this, you are presented with a selection of compatible windows to choose from. When you select one, you will be presented with a dialog box that offers you scaling options for the window as well as some information, including that this feature is highly experimental. So be aware if you decide to use this. This feature can also be used to capture plugins as well, but I mentioned this works with compatible windows because not all plugins seem to work, and this goes for stock plugins as well. I tested it with GMS, Flex, Harmor, and Serum 2. Serum 2 of course being a separate VST plugin, but of these plugins, only Flex and Harmor were capable of being added. So if you're interested in this feature, make sure to check which plugins work for you. Also, I should mention that the plugin needs to be active and open for it to appear in the video. If it is hidden, it will appear hidden as well. Add Spout is another video capture device, similar to a webcam, but I believe it is used for programs to output video feed from within that program. A quick example, because I learned how to do that recently, is in the game VRChat. So let me set that up real quick. Okay, here in VRChat, you might be able to tell I don't actually have any VR equipment, unfortunately, but whatever, my webcam works well enough. VRChat has an in-game camera that I can pull up here real quick. There we go. I can also position it how I want it. Lock it in position relative to me, and then whenever I move around, the camera will follow me around. But if I close the camera will go away. What if I want the camera to stay so that I can show people what I'm doing? Well, I would go to camera mode, select stream, and I can turn on Spout Stream. You see it says Spout Stream stays on while the camera is closed, and this virtual camera will actually have video output through Spout. You can even see the little floating camera there to remind you you're on camera. So back over in FL Studio, I can load VR Sender 1 from the Add Spout options, and loading that into an image effect will immediately show the stream from VRChat. Again, that's probably useful for live performances, especially for those wanting to hold concerts as a VTuber or something. There are probably also other programs that offer camera feed through Spout. If you know of any, let me know in the comments. I'm actually quite curious if there are other programs that offer that functionality. Up next in the Add Content tab are some that I have used less. Add Preset seems to want to load an FL Studio preset since clicking it shows the .fst file format, but what exactly is it trying to load? I'm not sure. The manual says it uses ZGame Editor presets. Oh! I shouldn't have been writing the script while very tired. I misinterpreted what it was doing. It says, use ZGame Editor presets projects as source video. So you can actually load up specifically ZGame Editor presets into your project, kind of like nesting scenes in OBS Studio. Okay, that's cool. I wonder how I can use that. Something I learned later on while working on this video, you can actually double click the preset that you loaded in the Add Content list, and it will open a window showing you the embedded effects that make up that preset, so that you can make changes to it as well. Very interesting. Anyway, add URL says it adds any streamable video file on the web. In my testing, a lot of video files didn't quite seem to work for me. I have this video file that I uploaded to Imgur that I was using for my Tumblr for pretty much the same purposes, and so far, this is the only one that's worked. So basically, it's a way to quickly load in media from the web, from supported websites. It also works for images as well. What's that? You don't have any media online that you can import into ZGame Editor Visualizer for your videos? No worries, that's what the Find Media Online button is for. Clicking that option pulls up a window where you can search and choose from literally thousands of pictures and videos, all royalty free, provided by Pexels. If you want to know more about them, you can click their name up here and it'll open yet another window leading you to their website. When you find an image or video that you want to use, simply click the Use This Image or Use This Video button respectively, and it will immediately add it to your ZGE Visualizer project. The last option here is Add NDI, which stands for Network Device Interface. This is one of those situations where if you don't know what that is, you probably don't need to worry about it. Otherwise, if you don't know what it is, but you would like to know if you have one, it's basically, from my understanding, software that is similar to the Spout input, sending audio and video output, but over an Ethernet network. Interestingly enough, I used to have an HDMI cable that claimed to also have Ethernet capabilities, and I didn't know what that entailed. I wonder if that would have been considered an NDI device or not. But with that, that's all the options to add content in the Add Content tab. The filtering option changes the way the alpha blend reacts. Actually, this doesn't appear to be the case. The manual says this: filtering. Choose how images are blended with the background when the alpha controls are used. However, the hint panel in FL Studio says when you hover over it, filtering mode to use for imported images. From my own observations, this affects the quality of imported images, whether this should appear softer or sharper. Bitmap, which it is on by default, doesn't seem to have too much different compared to linear. Both offer a softer appearance in pictures. Nearest Neighbor provides a sharper image with a lot of aliasing. Honestly, I don't know what the manual is on about with the alpha being involved. In my tests, I didn't notice any differences in the way the alpha slider faded away the content, but maybe I wasn't testing it properly. The last options on this page are pretty self-explanatory. Sync video with song position will force any videos to play only when the song is playing. Enable video preloading does just that, preloads the video onto your RAM so that it is accessed more quickly, which will help playback and syncing. Likewise, compress a video if the file size is too large and you notice your FL Studio taking some time to preview it. Just remember to uncompress it before rendering. With audio, of course, offers you the option to load a video with or without its audio. At the bottom, you can select all of your imported content, then remove if you want to remove them all, reload all if you notice loading issues, usually when adding or removing a bunch of files. Sometimes ZGame Editor Visualizer will get confused and just need them to be reloaded. The replace button, as previously mentioned, seems to only really work for images. If you want to replace a loaded image, select it and press replace, and the file explorer will open with the supported image files shown. Selecting any other type of loaded in file will also do the exact same thing. which doesn't really help because you won't be able to see those files, nor does it give you the option to view them. Remove unused is a quick clean button for if you've added a bunch of files that you aren't using, meaning they're not currently loaded in any effects. It'll remove them for you. And clone apparently only works on preloaded video files. It creates another copy of the video for purposes I'm sure some people will figure out. But now that we've added the content that we want, it's time for the main event. What to do with all of that content. The main tab is indeed going to be your main tab, as it is where all of the effects and settings are. On the right, you see there's a button for Wizard, which clicking on that will pull up a window for something I've never used, but I will be covering in the next video in this tutorial series. Since I'm showing you all of this to help you better understand the capabilities of ZGame Editor Visualizer as a method of video production, I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the option to completely subvert any actual effort and just have the plugin make a video for you. That is what the video wizard does for you, but I will go into further detail regarding that in the next video. The next button is your export button, very important. I will cover this in further detail at the end of this video. Below that is the freeze button, or hold visualization button as the hint panel says. Usually if something breaks, you'll find this button turning on by itself. There's probably a reason why you would want to activate it manually, but I cannot think of one right now. Below that is a drop-down menu to select the window mode of the preview window. By default, ZGE Visualizer comes with the preview window detached, which I think is fine. If you don't have a lot of space and don't mind everything looking even more cramped, you can set it to attached and it will attach to the bottom of the ZGame Editor Visualizer window. Or if you truly want the video out of sight, you can set it to wallpaper, where it will become the wallpaper of your FL Studio. This probably would be viewable if you aren't also trying to automate a bunch of parameters, but perhaps this is for people with more monitors for them to work off of. I only have two, so my usual setup is the preview window is detached, resting on my main screen, with the playlist right next to it so that I can see my changes to my automation clips more quickly, and the ZGE Viz window on my second monitor out of the way. Below that is your frame rate dropdown with a selection of frame rates to choose from. It also shows you what your current frame rate is, should you be experiencing any frame drops in your preview. Below that is your aspect ratio, which you can select from quite a few choices. 16:9 is your standard video format these days, while 9:16 is the vertical portrait version should you want to create videos for short form media platforms. Lastly, there is a global rotate knob and a global zoom slider for quick and easy effects, which of course can be automated. In the main workspace, as they refer to it as, is where you will be adding your effects. This is an effect layer. Each layer is labeled by a letter from A to Z. Then after Z, the layer names are simply L for layer, and then whatever number from 26 to 99, with 100 layers being the max ZGame Editor Visualizer will let you have. Layer A potentially being labeled as layer 0, but considered layer 1. You can rename a layer with the drop-down menu arrow here on the right, but for some effects that affect other layers, it will use the layer label, not the layer name. So if you forget, you can hover over the layer enable disable toggle and the FL Studio hint panel will show you which layer that is. If you want to reorder your layers, you can click and hold this reorder button and move the layer to where you want it to be. The layer will always be placed after the layer you place it on in the direction that you moved that layer. That might sound a bit confusing the way I explained that, but know that it doesn't matter on which side of the layer you drop the layer on. It is not based on how close to the center of two layers you drag it over. It is only move it in the direction you move it, and whatever layer you lay it on, it will be placed after that layer. If you move the layer to the right, it will be placed to the right of whatever layer you landed on, and if you move the layer to the left, it will be placed on the left of the layer. The order of the layers is important, of course. Like any video or image editing program, layers here work like layers in those programs, and adding more layers to the right will place them over anything to the left. That being said, you usually want your background image to be your first leftmost layer, since you'll be placing everything else on top of it. Some post-processing effects will also affect all of the layers to the left of them, so if there are some things you prefer for them not to change, make sure to order them appropriately. Alternatively, make use of buffer layers so that your post-processing effects will only affect the layers it is grouped with. Buffer layers will also group items to the left of them, and adding more layers will alternate these Christmassy colors to show they are separated. But I'll be doing a full standalone video on buffer layers later in this series. This is the color picker, which does not recolor the layer UI, but as previously mentioned, we'll set the color settings for that layer should it offer your standard HSL or HSV color options, those being hue, saturation, lightness, or value. It's good to remember that it exists, but it doesn't always work. These arrows scroll you through the various effects, and if you ever want more information regarding an effect, some effects will have this question mark available for you to press that will provide slightly more information regarding what that layer is and what the parameters do. Lastly, you can right-click a layer to see even more options. Collapse all layers will minimize and compress all of the layers. It doesn't say it for some reason, but if you right-click to open this menu and press C, that is the hotkey for doing that. Otherwise, pressing C on a layer will collapse just that layer. Expand all layers, of course, will expand them all if any of them are collapsed. Again, it doesn't say it, but you can right-click and press E to do this. Pressing E otherwise doesn't do anything. Auto-collapse layers will keep only your active layer open while collapsing all other layers, as well as automatically switching focus to any selected layer. Right-clicking and pressing A will toggle this effect on and off. Layer Arrangement Editor pulls up a window where you can manually type in the order of the layers that you want. I didn't know this was here before. It's certainly an interesting way of handling things. You can reorder the layers by letter, add new layers, clone a layer, and rename layers from here as well, as it mentions at the bottom of the window. Save Still Image will save a screenshot of whatever is happening at that very moment in the preview window. You have a selection of size options when you press the drop-down menu. Then you make your selection. Your File Explorer will appear asking you where you want to save the image and what name you want to give it. And lastly is a Show Background Pattern in Preview option, which does the same thing as the invisible button on the preview, and is also how I discovered that there is an invisible button on the preview window. That's all of the basic information regarding the main tab and the workspace. Now I think it's time that I run through all of the effects just to get a basic understanding of them. And there are a lot of effects to go through. I sure hope I know how to set up chapters on YouTube. If so, make sure to utilize them to your liking. When it comes to viewing the effects, if you haven't already, personally, I recommend using the tree view, which you can change right here. If you don't mind a screen full of words, you can use the categorized option as well, as it will just separate the large wall of text into the same categories that tree view gives you. Otherwise, simple view just shows them all to you in alphabetical order. But for yours and my sanities, I'll be using tree view. Also, it's very important to note, because I don't think I knew this and I didn't figure this out until I was proofreading my script, you can right-click on the Effects drop-down menu where you can find another way to open the color picker, another way to open the help panel, a button that will open the effect in ZGame Editor if you have that downloaded and set up so that it can open the effect, but more importantly, a button where you can reload the effect. I didn't realize it was there. Somewhere in my script I talked about reloading an effect and needing to remove and re-add it because I didn't realize that this button was here. So I'm not editing that out, wherever that is, I'm leaving that there, but know that you can also reload an effect this way to set it back to its default state. So with that, let's look at some of the categories and the effects therein. I've loaded in my preset ZGeViz project I made for this series so that I can have some content and settings prepared, so ignore the background image. First is the background category, which offers a variety of background effects, not including this background image. Fog Machine generates a smoke, or I guess fog, effect that you can overlay over your videos for a more dramatic atmosphere. If you turn on Alpha Transparency View, you can see just how this effect works a bit more. You can also load in your own image in the image source and have that replace the fog texture.
Here we go.
Four Corner Gradient presents you with the ability to create colors on all four corners of the video that create gradients between them. This is used for creating interesting colored lighting effects in your videos. It also offers a long list of blend mode options and an alpha slider, of course, to control the intensity of the effect. Grid creates a grid of squares that is always centered in the very middle of your project. You can change the resolution to change the size of the grid. I feel like this is useful for positioning items on the screen, though I have seen it used as a background element in some audio visualizers. It's Full of Stars generates a star field effect. You can change the color of the stars or load an image source to change the shape of the stars. If you automate the Holden parameter, you can create a charge-up effect that releases into a burst of stars for climactic moments. It's also audio reactive to whatever you have set in the audio source. It creates subtle motions of increasing or decreasing speed. It's interesting to note that if you click where it says author Jafe Wachesky, it will take you to their itch.io page where you can find games they've made using ZGame Editor. Very cool. Solid color is just a solid color that spans the size of the screen. It works with the color picker, of course. An extremely basic use for this effect would be a simple fade in, fade out transition effect. A more advanced use for this could be as a masking layer when used within buffer layers, which I will demonstrate in a later video after explaining both of those concepts within ZGame Editor Visualizer. Triangle grid contouring is a bit of a noisy one, because it is just that. It seems to be a weird noise generator if you want some motion going on somewhere. This too could probably be used in buffer layers to keep it contained in certain areas if you don't want the effects taking up the entire screen. If you want more information on what this is or how it works, you can click beneath the effect name where it says author Shane converted by Julian and ... and it will open a website for more information. Julian background MDL is another texture effect. You can load in images which will take up the spot of the dots if you change the source parameter from dot to image. Using a PNG image with alpha transparency works best, I feel. An interesting use I've seen of this effect is to group it together with a motion blur effect for a moving background texture. Julian Gradient Maker. Okay, while writing this script, I almost gave up on trying to figure out how this effect worked. But for the first time ever, okay, maybe the second time ever, the image line forum was actually helpful for a ZGame Editor Visualizer thing. I personally have been forgetting that the preview window is a thing that you can sometimes click on to make changes. If you click the edit button and click and drag somewhere in the preview window, you can create a start and end point for a gradient, which would be labeled S1 and E1. Then you can change the colors of them by selecting them and changing them individually. You can also set it to radial if you wanted to. You could also use this as a better vignette effect that way. More on that in a later video. If you don't want to make any more edits, you can turn off the edit button and your changes will persist. Just remember to turn it back on if you want to change anything. And from what I can tell, background seems to make your effect more prominent. Or I guess it adds a black background actually, which you can see with the alpha transparency view on. Interesting. Lastly, Julian Retro Road creates a customizable synthwave road effect. A lot of these parameters are perfect if you want to automate them to your music. Next is the blend category. This offers a variety of blending options, most of which I'm not too familiar with. First up is Buffer Blender, which I think I'll need to work with more myself. After figuring out how Julian Gradient Maker works, using that along with Buffer Blender would create some interesting blend effects. Buffer Blender allows you to select a bottom layer and a top layer so that you can blend the top layer with the bottom layer. The layer selections use the image sources, so you need to have your layers routed as buffer layers if you want to use this effect effectively. There are a lot of blend modes to choose from. You can create some funky effects if you load an image into the displacement layer and mess with the displacement settings. Clamping refers to the way the image reacts past the border of the image, while position refers to the entire effect. Zoom affects only the displacement effect. Ignore alpha will remove any alpha transparency in the image, which may cause some weird issues with some images. It is important to note that I mentioned that you may want to use this effect with buffer layers to use it more effectively, but I didn't mention why. A big reason is that when loading an image as one of the layers, it will stretch the image to fit the aspect ratio of the video. So if you don't want that stretching effect, simply loading an image in a buffer layer, then using the output from that layer will fix that. Dub Switcher Alpha Key is my go-to effect for chroma keying out images and videos. Adjust the key red, key green, and key blue for whatever color it is you're trying to remove. Unfortunately, you cannot use the color picker for this. The mix affects the overall blend of the effect. Threshold range affects the amount that the color is removed. Threshold width affects the fine-tuning of the color to better help bleeding over the edges. It's okay if the color removal isn't perfect. The edge saturation fakes a cleaner removal by desaturating the effect of the untreated color bleed to make it less obvious, and the saturation blend lets you fine-tune this effect should you really not want to lose too much color over the edges. Of course, it is preferred to use this effect in a buffer layer, but don't worry, I will indeed be covering this effect and others in the video focusing on buffer layers later in this series. Video Alpha Key seems to want to be a quicker chroma key for loaded in videos, offering RGB key and chroma key modes. If you're looking for a quick keying effect for a video where you don't want to have to worry about buffer layers, this one might be the one for you. But I could not get very clean results in my tests for an admittedly complex video of a fire effect. Simpler videos and images might work better. Yes, it works for images as well. I also couldn't help but notice it doesn't output alpha channel when using in buffer layers. I tried doing some spill cleanup while working on this effect and noticed this worked fine with the dub switcher alpha key, but not quite with this effect. Yielding from buffer is another basic effect useful for removing black backgrounds from an image source, including ones from a buffer layer. You can change the amount for a stronger removal effect, and the variance for a finer effect. Interestingly enough, this is one of, if not the only effect with the ability to flip the image horizontally or vertically. If you want to use this part of this effect, you can load the image you want into it, but it'll always stretch the image to fit the aspect ratio. If you want to keep the original aspect ratio, you can load the image into an image layer, set as a buffer layer, then load it into yielding from buffer, which should keep the aspect ratio of the image. And lastly is yielding mask, which I will talk about more in my masking tutorial later in this series. The next set of effects I will not be covering individually, as they are largely all the same. Visual or textural effects that can add noise or other visual effects to your projects with a variety of customizable parameters. These are canvas effects, and I will describe them in groups. 2D noise contours, 3-tap second order Voronoi, 3-tap 2D Voronoi, alloy plated Voronoi, and bioorganic wall are procedurally generated noise textures that you can use to add movement to a video. Bioorganic wall lets you load in an image source, which will use its colors as height data and create some really interesting noise effects. Bitpad Z might provide the ability to create animations on a Midi button pad, like the Novation Launchpad, or it might just be a visual representation of that style of animation. The help menu doesn't provide too much information as to what it is for, apart from saying Bitpad Z script unique parameters, which doesn't really help too much. I just know that if you enable the edit mode, you can edit the animation by clicking in the preview window. Move the frame slider to change the frame before enabling edit mode, then enable edit mode to edit that frame. Looking at the preview window, there are a lot of on-screen buttons that don't seem to do anything, or at least I couldn't get them to do anything. The only things that worked were the clicking. The cursor is a bit inaccurate sometimes. The first time I tried using it when writing the script, it wasn't very accurate, but it worked well enough. It seems fine now. Left click to place blocks, right click to remove blocks, middle click to select the color of an existing block, kind of like Minecraft. If anyone knows more about this effect, or if you've gotten it to work for you, please let me know in the comments. Bumped sinusoidal warp, cellular tiling, combustible Voronoi, and contoured layers are more procedural noise generators. Contoured layers offers the ability to load in audio from an audio source, but my test audio didn't seem to have any effect on it, so I don't know what it's supposed to affect, if anything. Dark spark, however, is a visual effect that is directly reactive to audio, creating spark effects to an audio in the audio source. If you want some really funky effect, you can also load an image source to take the place of the spark effect. Fun stuff. Digital brain is another texture effect. This one does indeed move depending on the audio signal from the audio source, in addition to its own camera movement, which of course can be changed with the camera speed parameter. Or if you want the abstract camera movement and don't want the audio reactivity, you can disable beat nudging. Electric, fast minimal animated blocks, flaring, and flow noise are more customizable textures. You can use the threshold slider in the electric effect to remove some of the black and create a better blend with the background. Same thing with flow noise. Frequency ring is another simple audio reactive visual effect. You can also set a custom image if you want, which is easier to notice if you turn down the activity parameter. Turn down the density to see it more clearly. If you completely turn off the activity parameter, the animation will freeze in whatever last state it was in and simply pulse to the music. Actually, I can't really tell, but it looks like there is still some amount of movement. You can also change the pattern parameter to see what kind of rotation is going on. Hexagonal Voronoi line distance and lava are more textures. N-gon figure is a pseudo audio reactive visual effect. I think the audio affects the dispersion of the shape in relation to the disrupt slider. Actually, this one's help screen does provide some information, and it says the disrupt parameter offsets movement based on tempo, so not quite from the audio source, I don't think. You can also load in an image and or mesh to take the place of said N-gon figure. Turning down the N-gon slider can make this more noticeable. One tweet cellular pattern just looks like a basic Voronoi noise texture. I recommend using it with the buffer blender effect to get some nice blend effects from it. Overly satisfying is a visual effect that exists. Honestly, only the alpha slider works and there are no other options, so maybe also use this with buffer blender if you want to use it for some interesting blend effects. Perspex web lattice and quasi-infinite zoom Voronoi are more noise textures. Rain is another visual effect that doesn't really have anything to do with rain. If you want a better rain effect, there will be one later on. This, I suppose, is more meant to be like raindrops splashing on the ground, I guess. Turn up the spawn rate if you want a complete downpour. Hue Wander is the ability for the spawning effects to change color, while Wander Speed is the rate in which it will change color. You can load a custom image as well. Turn the size down to see it better. Rounded Voronoi Border Refinement, Round Voronoi Borders 2, Round Voronoi Borders, Rounded Voronoi Blocks, and Rounded Voronoi Borders are more noise textures. The first two offer the option to load in a custom image but treat them differently. Shimmering Cage, yes, spelled like that, is an interesting one. It's a visual effect that creates a, well, cage-like shape around the camera. If you change the size, however, you can see how the effect works. It uses a 3D object clipped into the camera. As such, you can load your own mesh object if you want to. If you load an image, it will be assumed as the material for the 3D object. This is audio reactive as well, with the peak amount, yes, spelled like that, affecting it based on the peak data from the audio source, and the bar oscillation affecting the pulse of the shape based on the tempo of the FL Studio project. If you're using audio files instead of loading ZGeViz into your actual FL Studio project, I'd recommend detecting the tempo of the audio if you don't know it already, and set it as the project tempo if you want a more accurate response. This effect also has an actually helpful help screen if you want more information. Sky Ocean is another interesting-ish visual effect. Set a custom image for some silly visuals. Smooth noise contours and smooth Voronoi contours are more noise textures. Stack Trace is an interesting digital overlay visual effect. Change the threshold parameter to add or remove detail of the effect. Star Taser 2 and Taffy Pools are visual effects. Star Taser 2 is similar to the rain effect with the randomly spawning shapes that can be swapped out with a 3D mesh object, while Taffy Pools is similar to the Shimmering Cage effect, where the effect attempts to encompass the camera. Change the size to pull this effect back. You can also load a mesh object. This effect is also audio reactive to the audio source, with the beat spins and peak knocks parameters. Shimmer affects the random colors, and object number affects the number of objects. Those were the canvas effects. If you want to know more about those, I suggest playing around with them a bit and seeing if there's something you'd like to use. If they are, remember to set up your own presets so that you can load them with your settings whenever you want. You can save just the layer information as a file, or you can set up an entire ZGeViz preset and then load that into a new project. Up to you. The next category is clouds, which can be easily summed up by the name of the category. These are visual effects of fly-throughs of various cloudy environments. These consist of cheap cloud fly-through, cloud flight, combustible clouds, and nebulous tunnel. Decent effects, but very busy effects in my opinion. I'd recommend blending them more than just with the alpha control. Since this was a short category and they're all largely the same, we'll just move right into the next one. The next category is feedback effects, which according to the manual means to say they are video image feedback style effects. So while none of these are actually audio reactive, you might want to consider using these along with the parameter shake effect, which we'll discuss momentarily, to create specific effects that alter the image or video. First up is the 70s Kaleido. None of the color parameters seem to do anything, so you'll want to automate the density and movement sliders. This effect on its own also affects all layers that are to the left of it, as previously mentioned regarding how effects are processed in the workspace. Be careful where you have it situated in your layer order. Otherwise, I would just recommend using buffer layers. Honestly, once you've understood how to use them, they make ZGame Editor Visualizer so much easier to use. Next is boxed in. Again, the color sliders don't seem to do anything from my testing, or at least if they do, their effects aren't very noticeable. I'm starting to think these sliders are stock when creating effects for ZGame Editor Visualizer. This one creates a little boxy environment from the underlying image. It has a feedback slider that you can automate to increase the effect. Play around with these effects to see what it can do. You can also load in a mesh object, however, which you can see if you change the rotation B slider by about 25%, to center it at least, and then change the zoom warp to get a better look at it. Feed Me seems to also have some simple effects. This one's color parameters actually do things this time, except for the alpha slider, of course. Automate the feedback and lightness parameters for subtle light effects, the suck or blow for a subtle pulse effect, and the mode 5 states slider if you want to have a seizure. Seriously, be careful when messing with this slider. Personally, if this is supposed to create visual effects, I think it's broken, or I just don't know how to use it effectively. Feed Me Fractal offers the same lighting effects as the Feed Me effect, but this one also creates a fractal of the underlying image. Use fractal size to change the number of images. Spherical projection is an interesting one, and dangerous, sort of. By default, this effect is set to canvas feedback, down where it says texture, which means it is using the visual information from all underlying layers. It is creating a spherical, I suppose, HDRI image and encompassing the camera inside it. You can load in your own mesh object for some interesting visuals, but if the object isn't clipping the camera inside of it, you'll get some weird issues with the image in the background, which you can really see more if you scroll through the effects. If you want to avoid this, again, probably use a buffer layer. Also, you set the texture parameter to image and you can load in your own image source. I don't really know what parameter you want to automate here, but I do really like that mesh object option. Warp Back creates a warping, almost fractal effect when you crank up the warp parameter. Again, this effect affects the underlying layers, which you can see if you turn on alpha transparency view and change the alpha. The background isn't actually here anymore, so if you want this effect in addition to your background, you'll want to use a buffer layer. You can also automate the lightness of this one for a fade effect. These color parameters also seem to actually work. Wormhole Darken creates a darkened wormhole effect that might not be as noticeable at first, but if you tweak the movement and rotation parameters, you can see it moving. You can also decrease the feedback to see it more. It lets you load in an image, but I don't see for what purpose. You can also load in a mesh object, and it will put it way in the distance in the center for some reason. Lastly, there's Wormhole Eclipse. Similar effect to the last, but more noticeable at first. Tweak the movement and rotation to get it moving. Play around with some of the settings to see what it can do. You can probably automate the Axis Y and Axis X parameters to create your own version of the Doctor Who intro effect. You can also load in an image to have it spin like crazy off in the distance. And you can load in a 3D mesh object to completely break everything. Next is the hardware category. As of now, there's only one option, and that's DMX control, which I am to understand is used for controlling external devices that you might want to automate effects to. So like lights, basically. I don't own any, so I can't demonstrate it for you, but if you want to use this, you'll need to go to the Settings tab and select Enable DMX Output, then select your device from there. If you've used this, let me know in the comments. If you'd like to use this, I can recommend a video tutorial from FL Studio, which I will link in the description. The next category is HUD. Why is it HUD? I don't know, but it sure is the most versatile category. Oh, wait, that's right. Since ZGame Editor Visualizer uses the game development engine ZGame Editor as its basis, these are, in fact, various HUD, heads-up display elements that you might use when developing games in the ZGE engine. Of course, I don't know why I never realized that. Starting with HUD 3D, you'll notice that a lot of these HUD effects won't seem to do anything at first. At the bottom, they are set to post effect by default, meaning whatever you do will be treated as a post-processed effect and will affect the layers underneath it. So you see, if I start tweaking some of these parameters, it will affect the image I have as the background layer. Since this one is the HUD 3D effect, some of these effects will transform the image in a pseudo 3D fashion. You could actually use this effect to flip an image horizontally or vertically by maxing out the rotation X and or the rotation Y parameters. If you mess with the layer parameters, you can get a recursive effect, similar to the old solitaire victory celebration thing that everyone loved. If you want to use this effect as a post-process layer, I'd recommend using it as a buffer layer, of course. Again, I'll go over how to use those in another video. But if you want to use its effects for a different picture, change the in-source parameter to image source, and of course, it will take whatever image you have selected in the image source. HUD callout lines creates that sort of effect that you might see on futuristic optical displays where lines are pointing at things in the display and describing what they are or what they do. You can right-click in the preview to edit the start and end points, and then use the parameters to edit the line's length and such. HUD free line is a line. Yep, I feel a bit dumb that I never realized that before. But that's okay, because I ended up using a fancier looking line in my videos, which we'll get to shortly. Again, you can use the parameters to adjust the line. The hint window says you can click on the line and push keys to make changes, but I couldn't get that to work. I wonder if the ability to press keys inside the preview has changed, or if there's a setting that I've not enabled which would allow me to do so. HUD graph linear is exactly as it says, a linear graph that reacts to either sound frequency or signal pitch from the selected audio source. Select the frequency option to toggle between the two. It starts pretty small, so use the scale to increase it. The signal pitch reactivity will be useful as a visual for signal from a specific source, like a vocal track. It offers quite a bit of customizability, of course. Also, if you don't want to accidentally click on it when right-clicking in the preview, you can deselect is selectable, as with most of the HUD effects, as you will see. HUD graph polar is the same thing as HUD graph linear, but is the more favored visual of a circular graph, I assume because it is the most visually appealing. If you increase the radius, you can increase the size and you can fit a logo inside it. Perfect framing to attract the viewer's eyes. If you're interested in using this effect with a logo, a neat effect you might try is to use it as a mask that will reveal more of your logo. I can set that up really quick as a demonstration, but know that I will go into further detail in a later video where I cover how to use buffer layers for masks. And there we go. I think it's kind of a cool effect. I'll show you how you can do this in a later video, but for now, let's move on. HUD grid says it's a dynamic grid of lines and points, and it sure seems to be just that. Again, another potentially creative HUD effect for simulating a screen or something. This one has a lot of customization options as well that I'll let you go through on your own. HUD image has become my primary image effect as well as post-processing image effect. Again, by default, it loads in as a post effect, which you can use to manipulate the underlying layers, scale, and transform. You can also right-click the preview to select the image and move it around by clicking on the anchor point, or if you don't want to do that, deselect the Is Selectable toggle. You'll see that the position X and position Y sliders move as you move it around. If you want to reset it, and if I didn't already mention it, you can hold the Alt key and click on the parameters and they will reset to their default states. If you switch the in-source parameter to image source, you can load in an image from the image source, pretty standard stuff, but the main reason why I prefer HUD image over the basic image effect, I will talk about in a moment when I talk about the image effects category. HUD mesh is your standard 3D object renderer. Load in your 3D mesh object, and if you're not lazy like me, its accompanying image texture, and you can load them both in here. So here's a model I downloaded of a fennec fox that does have an associated image texture. By default, HUD mesh starts with the mesh rendered as a flat material. Switch it to smooth to see the imported texture. Scale it up with size to see it better if you need to. You can also use rotation X and rotation Y to move it around to get a better look at it. Moving the spinning slider will cause the object to start spinning on its own. I talked about this effect before, how there are other material view options, but if you don't want to have a material texture for your model, you can use the color settings here to color it how you want. Or again, if you're a wannabe 3D artist like me, and you've managed to bake in your color onto your OBJ, 3ds, or .zge mesh file, or if you managed to download any that already had the colors baked in, then in the Meshes tab, you can enable the With Colors option, and you should be able to see those colors on your model already. Additionally, before preparing for this video, I had thought HUD Mesh to be the best, and I'm pretty sure only, effect that simply renders your 3D model cleanly. But if you're here to learn about 3D meshes in ZGeViz, stay tuned for the image effects category real soon, because I don't know how I didn't know about one of the effects that's hiding in that category. HUD meter bar seems to be a music sensitive meter bar, customizable as well by selecting your image as the image source, a simple UI element for audio input. I'm assuming by the information in the help screen that it is fully customizable, as it details how the image is divided so that you can maybe locate the image file and edit it yourself. Actually, upon further investigation, I'm assuming it's the HUD meter bar bitmap.png located in Documents, Image Line, ZGame Editor Visualizer, Cache. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. HUD meter linear is a numerical element used for counting, similar to a previously mentioned effect, but better, I think. Use the value parameter to increase the count and have the number line fill up. Max is the max possible value. Place value sets how many digits you can have, from 1 to 4. HUD meter radial is the same thing as the previous one, but a circle instead. Go figure. HUD prefab is a rather useful one. Since these effects offer design options for HUD UI elements, you can find a lot of various shapes here ready to use. In the shape dropdown, you can find all the ones available, or you can press the arrows to scroll through them. For my own music visualizers, I started using line 50 for my divider, but there are a lot of UI options to choose from. Something useful to point out about these options is the basic shapes. The basic shapes are nice for if you want simple shapes to use as a mask. Again, we'll talk about masking later, but if you might already have pieced together how to do that from this video, know that for some reason, the circle is the only shape that's fully opaque. The other shapes are, for some reason, somewhat transparent. If you pre-multiply the alpha, that should fix it. I'll cover that later. Lastly, there's HUD text. Good old HUD text. I believe I talked about this one a little bit earlier, but this is the only text effect I use now. A lot of customization options are available here, but more importantly, you can load in your own fonts. Next up, or what I'll call the basic image effects. Nothing too flashy, not too busy. Well, most of them. First up is 4 images, which just displays 4 of your images that you've added. The only parameter is the alpha slider. If you scroll through the image source, the images shuffle around. That might have practical uses, but I can't think of any. Let me know in the comments if you can think of any. Also, you might notice that this GIF that I've loaded in is freaking out. This GIF is only 2 frames long, and it's trying to play that GIF animation at 60 FPS. Meaning, I think it's trying to play this 2-frame GIF at 120 frames per second. I can somewhat slow it down by setting the frame rate to 15, but I don't want my video to be at 15 FPS, just for my GIF to work properly. If you're experiencing this issue, I recommend treating the GIF like a video and controlling it with a video controller, which we'll look at further in the next category, or also ensure you have the Sync Video to Song Position toggle enabled in the Add Content tab. Next is your basic image effect for simple image loading. It supports transparent PNG images, animated and transparent GIF images, as well as the previously mentioned supported video files. My problem with this, and why I stopped using it early on, is, as you can see, the size parameter starts at its max. so you can't increase the size past that for zoom effects. And in the other direction, the zoom out only goes so low. You could technically get bigger zooms by increasing the width and height parameters, I guess. Also, the default positioning method is set to old, which causes some annoying issues if you scale down your image and are trying to reposition it. Setting the positioning option to improved works much better, but be careful if you've already created automation clips for the X and Y positions, because they will be quite different. Additionally, this effect has the ability to render a solid color, which will appear as a square image. This will be useful for using a square image as a mask for later projects. At the bottom, there's a rounded slider, which will round the image and, oh, it can actually turn a square into a circle. I wonder if I knew this already or if I just forgot. Huh, well there you go. You don't even have to use HUD prefab for a perfect circle shape anymore. The image layer gives you a square mask and a circle mask. ImageBox renders a 3D box and sets its face textures as whatever image you have loaded. Or at least, I thought that's all it did. I was messing around with this a little bit while preparing for this video, and I couldn't help but notice you can load in a mesh object and its material image, and it looks much cleaner than HUD mesh does actually. Yeah, see, look at that. The lighting is much darker and you can see the seams more clearly here. Also, a little pet peeve of mine I've had with the HUD mesh effect was the fact that there's no fine controls for rotating the model. Well, there are, rotation X and Y, but that's all, no Z axis. And if you activate the spinning parameter, then stop it, there's no way to reset the position of the model. Wherever you stop the spinning is now where the model is permanently locked unless you completely remove the effect and add it again. ImageBox seems to not only have a spinning function for each axis, rotation speed X, Y, and Z, but you can manually rotate these separately with rotation X, Y, and Z. And when you reset them to their default positions, they actually reset the model to its default position. Damn! Looks like I'll be switching things up a bit after all. Anyways, let's look into this effect a bit more, because now I'm more intrigued by it. So as I said, I previously thought this effect just rendered a box that showed your image on it that you have loaded, and you can see that with the rotation X, rotation Y, and rotation Z parameters. Something to note, rotation X seems to be the only rotation parameter set to the object's local axis of rotation, meaning, in case you aren't certain, if I rotate the X axis, you'll see that it rotates around the two faces of the cube on the left and right sides. If I rotate the cube along the Y axis and change where those faces are, rotating around the X axis still rotates the cube along those faces. As you see, it now rotates towards the direction it's facing. However, rotation Y and rotation Z seem to be set to rotate around the global axis, meaning it doesn't matter how the cube is rotated, it will always rotate in the same orientation. If I reset the rotation and start rotating around the Y axis, you'll see it rotates along the top and bottom faces, getting a horizontal motion in relation to the cube. But if I rotate the X axis, so that those top and bottom faces are tilted, a local rotation would keep the same horizontal rotation in relation to the cube. But now, as I rotate along the Y axis, you'll see that the entire cube just turns in the new orientation horizontally. That is also why the Z axis rotation has a strange effect to it no matter how the cube is oriented. If the X axis are the left and right faces, the Y axis are the top and bottom faces, the Z axis are the front and back faces. But since it isn't the object's local axis of rotation, it's the global axis, the Z axis rotates centered on the camera no matter what, which creates an odd visual effect in my opinion. But enough with the default cube. The other things to look at with this effect are that you can load in other 3D meshes, as previously mentioned, and if you have textures for those, you can load their textures in as well. You can also change the texture scale and rotation if you want, as well as the texture wrap, how it reacts to rendering past the borders of the image. Or if you have a baked-in material or color, you can ensure you have the with colors toggle enabled in the meshes tab, and you can load in that color data as well. Image mashup cycles through your images, almost like a flipbook animation. Ideally, you could in fact create a flipbook animation. It looks like whatever image you have selected as your image source, the image count will always start from that image and progress downward through the list the appropriate count. By default, the animation is controlled by the speed parameter only, but if you enable BPM sync, you can have it flip through to the tempo of the FL Studio project, which the speed slider will no longer be used for in favor of the BPM step parameter, with the options being 1 beat, 2 beats, 4 beats, and 8 beats. No faster options, only slower. Also, in my trials, the images I used were stretched to fill the aspect ratio of the video, so keep that in mind if you want to use this. Either have images that are already the correct aspect ratio on your video, or potentially use a buffer layer that resizes the image. You can also use a temporary layer to check your scaling to ensure it's correct too if you do that. The color, rotate, scale, and position sliders here are actually the amount of randomness for that parameter. Each frame of the animation will trigger a new instance of each parameter, and the higher the slider is will increase the intensity of the effect.
This wall cannot contain it.
Image masked seems to create 3D bars that are masked to whatever image you have loaded in the image source. If you enable the off reactive slider, it looks like it is reactive to the audio source frequency, with the base frequencies being in the center. I say this is a 3D effect because if you enable the spinning parameter, yes, spelled like that, the bars begin spinning, and you can see that they have the same annoying spinning effect as the HUD mesh, so when you stop it, they will stop wherever they land with no way to reset it. Additionally, you can load in your own 3D meshes to use as the bars. I say meshes because it looks like the bars use one object for the tips and another object for the center. So if you have multiple meshes loaded, it will load the first one as the tip and the second one as the middle. Additionally, it's called image masked, but the effect creates an annoying mask effect where only the bars are masked to the loaded image source and forces a black background over everything else. So if you want to use it over your background, you're going to have to use this effect with the Julian from buffer effect loaded in as the output from the buffer layer, and make sure the ignore black toggle is on. Image slices chops up your image into slices and can react to your audio source with reactivity A and reactivity B, yes, spelled like that. You can also use reslice speed to have these slices randomize the order within the picture. Set reset slices to 0 to reset the order of the slices and recompile the image. Or set to 1 to compile the slices in reverse order apparently. It doesn't flip the image, but it actually slices the image and reorders them in reverse order. Image sphere warp creates a spherical object within a warped environment with the loaded image source. A lot of these parameters seem capable of being automated, so play around with them to see what suits you. Image sphincter replicates the loaded image source several times to create a spherical fractal shape, reminiscent of a hyperboloid. The effect accepts an audio source, but I don't see any parameters that are audio reactive, so that might just be a leftover default setting from when creating this effect. You can also load in a mesh to replace the default segment shape, which I believe is an octahedron. You can see your mesh more clearly by lowering the segment number. Unfortunately, when loading in your own mesh, you can't use your own textures, not like the image box effect. So if I wanted my pop ads here to be pink, it will either be the default empty image texture, or I would have to load in an image of a single color to use as the fill, because the HL sliders do work, but since I don't have a clear image, it would just be recoloring whatever image is loaded. I can make a quick unnecessary workaround to this by using a solid color effect as a buffer layer, and either keep that layer white and use the image sphincter's HSL sliders to recolor it, or vice versa with the solid color layer's HSL sliders. Though I'd recommend the former because changing the solid color effect's HSL sliders also affects the lighting of the mesh in the image sphincter effect, creating a sort of softer toon shader effect, which if that's what you're going for, go ahead, but I recommend leaving that solid color white and changing the HSL sliders in the image sphincter since that only affects the mesh directly. Adjusting the segment speed gives you an idea of how the intended effect works, And with a name like Image Sphincter, tread lightly when altering the segment size parameter, because yeah, when messing with that, you can really see it kind of looks a bit like a
B hole. B complete. B 100%.
Image Tile Sprite uses a tiled sheet to create an animation, like a lot of classic or retro games. I've not really messed with this, but if you want to have sprite animations, you'll want to make sure you designate the tile width and height as some multiple of 16 pixels. You can change the size of the animation with the zoom slider, and the speed of the animation with the speed slider. Or if you'd rather take control of the animation yourself, there is a manual slider at the bottom that will take over the speed once moved off from 0. If you have an alpha channel on your sprite sheet, which of course you most likely will, you will need to set the blend mode to alpha/1 - source alpha, yes, spelled like that, with OME, or alpha 1. If you're watching this in the future after someone at ImageLine actually happened to have watched this video and has since corrected the typos I've pointed out here, know this should say 1 - source alpha. Image unscaled is just that, an unscaled version of your image. If your image is larger than the resolution of your video, you will not be able to see it properly, and adjusting the position will not do what you want it to do. Centering the X and Y may help, but that's about all you can do with this effect. The help window says it's used for a specific thing, but I can't imagine what that thing will be useful for. Image Wall creates a multi-mirrored pattern of your loaded image source, with repeat X and repeat Y being the sliders to increase or decrease the amount. You can alter the color of your image here as well. Apparently, the global ZGeViz rotate and zoom parameters do not affect this effect, according to the help panel. However, I found that to be the case for most of the effects in this category. The null slider I believe was once the size slider, but instead of removing the slider, to denote that the size does not change, it's just there as an inactive slider. And finally, the image warp creates a warped fractal effect, similar to the warp back feedback effect, but instead of affecting the underlying layers, it creates the effect with the loaded image source. Use the warp parameter to warp. Next are the internal controllers. Not a lot of information exists in the manual regarding this category, but as I understand it, these effects are used to control various aspects of ZGame Editor Visualizer. First up, for example, is Peak Band Controller, which I believe is a 4-band peak limiter that might affect the audio of the video once rendered and not of your FL Studio project. As such, you can set your audio source up here, so if you're not using ZGame Editor Visualizer for live performance visuals, in order to hear this effect in action, you would need to render your video out and see if that's the result you want for it. Otherwise, you need to go back and edit it and re-render the video. Which of course, there's nothing wrong with having to re-render projects, especially if you're fine-tuning certain details. It just becomes more of a problem for bigger projects. Additionally, you can set the bands to have an image from your image source, and it will overlay the image over the peak band effect. I say overlay and not replace, because if you lower the alpha slider, you can see the band behind the image. Actually, it looks like it's replacing the borders of the bands, which makes sense that they're their own image. So there you go, if you want to use this effect, you can make your own frames for the bands. The next effect is one that I feel will be the most used in this category, as it is the video controller. The video controller needs to be added in addition to having your video or GIF loaded in an image effect layer of your choice. Set the image source as the same as your video and it will assume control of the video. When you initially load a video in an image effect, you may notice that the video plays on its own. If you take control of it with Video Controller, it will sort of stop, but at least in some of my trials, though it didn't always happen, it might also start bugging out. That is because it is still trying to play on its own while fighting the play control of the video controller. You can automate the position slider to scrub to the position in the video, but it might still look a bit glitchy. That is because over in the Add Content tab, you'll want to enable Sync Video with Song Position so that now the video will not try to play on its own until the video is playing, forfeiting all control over to ZGame Editor Visualizer and FL Studio. So you will see now that if I play the song, the video will play correctly and stop correctly, and the position slider will start to move on its own. You can move the slider manually too, but if you plan on automating it, you should turn off the play toggle so that the video won't play on its own and the position slider won't fight the automation. Automating the position slider is very useful for making videos last as long as you want them to, especially if they loop and you want the loop to happen at specific moments. In other words, personally, I found it useful for beat syncing GIF animations. Actually, funnily enough, I used that exact technique to animate the video playing in the background of my song óÓòò. The video was a simple 4 or 8 bar animation I made in Blender of the pause stomping to the beat, but I decided later that I wanted the pause to actually follow the pattern of the kick drum, so I added extra animation by manipulating the playback of the video. There are other controls here as well. You can change the speed of the animation, the loop start and loop end, if your video has audio, in the Add Content tab, make sure to enable with audio, and you can control the audio here as well, mute, volume, and pan. I'm not entirely sure what the multi-out does, but it looks like it routes to one of the possible 16 MIDI channels, or from, maybe. I'm not too sure. I'm trying to think what it could be useful for. Maybe how I mentioned earlier in that video chopping demonstration. You want to do that but with multiple instances of the same video? You would have multiple video controllers linked to the same video but routed to different MIDI channels perhaps? But I thought adding new layers would cause them to already be on different MIDI channels, so I'm not too sure. The last internal controller is ZGE XY controller. Another one with no information as to what it does, but I can only imagine you can link external videos to these parameters and control them from within ZGE Visualizer, or something like that. I don't know. Honestly, can't make heads or tails. Okay, so after doing a little bit of research, I did find one super useful web page that helped regarding this ZGE XY controller effect, but it was in Japanese. From what I could gather from their explanation, however, thanks to Firefox's ability to translate web pages, you can use this effect to animate various internal controls. Go figure. But it takes some setup. If you're familiar with Fruity XY controller, you probably already have an idea as to how to use this. If so, please enlighten us in the comments. First, you'll want to go into the Settings tab and toggle Enable Internal Controllers on. While we're here, take note of the red, green, blue, and luminance channels in the bottom. Now if I delete this automation clip here that I've set up for my GIF animation, what we can do is actually animate that position slider using ZGE XY controller. Before we do that, know that if you have your project paused, it will look like the effect is doing nothing. Only when you press play, either in pattern mode or song mode, it doesn't matter, is when you will see it start moving. Instantly, you can kind of get an idea as to what's happening here and what you can use it for. Before we look at the settings, let's link it to the video controller. I'm going to right click on the position slider and select Link to Controller, then a window will pop up, as some of you might already be aware of. In the internal controller section, I'm going to open the drop-down menu and look for the ZGame Editor Visualizer section. You will notice that there are the red, green, blue, and luminance averages that you could link it to. If you do that, you will notice that back in the Settings tab, if I move the appropriate channel, it will affect the parameter I linked to it. This isn't important though, because you'll see that if you right click any of these, you can't create any automation clips or anything like that. That is why ZGE XY controller utilizes its own scripts to take control of these parameters. Going back to the remote control settings, I'm going to change the internal controller to ZGE Viz script 1. And just like that, you can see I have the same animation I was having before. ZGE XY controller uses the song's tempo information, so in frequency, you can change it between eighth, quarter, half, 1 bar, and 2 bars. In the preview, you can see the visual representation going crazy on the faster speeds. You can also change the shape of the line by changing the path. Saw wave is pretty straightforward. Triangle wave if you want a sort of ping pong effect. Square wave for a snappier effect, which I could use for my dancing Ulrich gif. But for some reason, ZGame Editor Visualizer is looping the animation right at the end of the position slider instead of keeping it the 2 frames that it is. So as it stands now, the current settings make the animation look weird. More on that in a moment. The next 2 paths, circle and syncopate, are interesting motions. Linking this to an image's position might create some interesting motions. The last path option is random, which is truly random. It seems to also ignore the frequency settings, so there's no slowing it down. For the animators and video editors, easing offers exactly what you think it might. Easing options for smoothing the path the controller travels. There are a lot of options to choose from, each creating different effects. Then there's wrap, which I believe indicates how the end of the path will interact with the beginning of it when looping. The other parameters, alpha, controls the visibility of this visual in the preview. Scale X and scale Y indicate the intensity that the path is followed. If you look at the internal controllers in the Settings tab, X is the red channel and Y is the green channel. When linking the internal controller, I linked it to script 1, that's the red channel. So you'll see as I'm changing the scale X and position X, the lines separate and you can see the red and green lines, while the yellow line is the controller's path. The position X and position Y sliders indicate where the controller will start along the path. This is most evident with the saw wave path since the controller starts in the bottom left corner. Changing the position X and position Y becomes more visible when you follow it. As I mentioned earlier for my little 2-frame animated dancing Ulrich, if I wanted to use the square wave path to automate my little dancing boy, I don't want the position slider in the video controller to reach the end. So I would lower the scale slider of the ZGE XY controller to something more reasonable. Likewise, for that GIF of the Super Animal Royale character dancing, I want the arm pump part of the animation to happen on the downbeat, so I would need to shift the start of the animation by using the position X slider. When I do that, you'll see the animation isn't as fluid. That's because the path clips the top of the graph, or as the wrap menu puts it, it clamps the path so it can't supersede the graph. Flip would give it a slight ping pong effect before restarting the path. I want it to roll so that it immediately starts the path over after maxing out. Well then, that ended up being more information than I anticipated. I hope that helped someone. If it helped you, let me know in the comments. Also, you may have noticed in the remote controller settings that ZGame Editor Visualizer had a script 3 and script 4 internal controllers. I don't know what those are for, but I'm curious if anyone does. Let me know in the comments. On to the next category. Midi is the next category, and it offers a variety of Midi visualizations that you can use to visualize your Midi patterns using a Midi out layer. I'm going to set up a similar situation to what I set up earlier for the video cue points portion of this video, but I'm going to use the pad plugin from this song for my Midi input. I'm going to add a Midi out layer and a layer to link the two together. Of course, if you have a Midi instrument connected, you can use this as your input as long as it's set to the same port as your ZGame Editor Visualizer. The first effect is Casio SK5, which is a detailed model of, I assume, that specific piano. So remember, if you want to get the visuals to work, you have to go to your settings tab and set the Midi port that you want ZGame Editor Visualizer to communicate with. Then in the Midi out layer, make sure that it is set to the same port. The channel can be changed to the Casio SK5 effect as well instead of relying on the layer's channel data. You can use the HSL color settings to customize the color of the frame of your Casio SK5, which is neat. You can also change its transform down here, and since this is a 3D model, you get rotation on the X, Y, and Z axes. But of course, this uses the same rotational axes as the image box effect, so the X-axis is the local axis, while Y and Z are the global axes. There are toggles for the color key press visibility, and if you want for only the keys to be visible and hide the frame. You can also adjust the octave of the visible keys to better fit your MIDI with the key range menu. Interestingly enough, you might notice you can load in a custom mesh. Doing so sort of just slaps the meshes inside the keyboard. In my previous tests, I only used one mesh, but with multiple meshes loaded in, it looks like it replaces a bunch of things. So it looks like this is just the way that the ZGame Editor Visualizer handles some meshes. I don't know why the option to change the mesh is still open though. There's some information in the help menu as well if you need it. The next effect is MIDI Spiral. Similar to the ZGE XY controller, the FL Studio project needs to be actively playing for the visuals to be seen. It receives input from the MIDI out channel and MIDI instruments communicating on the same MIDI port. The visual creates dots for each note starting from the middle right and circling all the way around counterclockwise or anti-clockwise, depending on where you're from, back to the middle right of the circle. I don't know why you would want to, but be careful not to go too high in the insane octaves, because the effect can't handle that high and it will cause a soft crash. There are a lot of settings to play with, so feel free to experiment if you want. The split key spin slider indicates how the notes will spin down the vortex. There are 3 positions for the slider, left, middle, and right. Left, or 0%, spins all notes clockwise. Middle, or 50%, splits the spin direction at middle C, C4. Higher notes go clockwise, lower notes go counterclockwise. And the right, or 100%, spins all notes counterclockwise. You can also adjust the spin clockwise counterclockwise, which will actively rotate the direction the notes spin down the vortex. Something to note that it also tells you in the help panel for this effect. The animation speed for this effect is indicated by the video's frame rate. So if you're working with 30 FPS but you change your mind or forgot to set it to 60 FPS and you do so after the fact, you'll find it moving way more quickly than before. So you might need to adjust the vortex speed to account for that. In-speed and outspeed affect the animation of the notes appearing and disappearing. Lastly, you can also load in a custom image to use as the note dots. The last MIDI effect is Piano Roll 3D, which I suppose is supposed to appear like a 3D version of the piano roll with a lot more flashy effects. At the top, there are note labels. They only cover 1 octave, but that's all you need since it crams all octaves into this one space. If you have images loaded in, selecting one will set that one as what looks to be a broken element that might be a measure number or something, just below and beneath the note labels. And then everything after that first image will replace the note labels in the order they appear in your list. I assume so that you can create your own custom labels, so keep that in mind. You can also load in a custom mesh object to be the note indicator, but know that there are no options to rotate the object whatsoever, so you may want to bake in the position and rotation of the mesh if you want to use one. You can also use a default cube instead if you want, with the Use Cubes toggle, or just hide the mesh entirely. Turn on and off these distracting beams around the notes, hide the measure bars, hide the labels, Position Y moves where the notes spawn from. Spawn scale changes the scale of the note spawning. There's also a toggle for if the Midi is in 3/4 time or not, which is pretty limiting. Otherwise it's in 4/4, so if you're like me and you have a song written in 7/4, or pretty much anything other than those two time signatures, the measure bars will not match, so you probably want to hide those as well. The next category is miscellaneous, probably the least used category I've ever looked at. Thankfully, it looks like all but one effect has information, and the one that doesn't, I think I'll understand. The first effect is Audio Generator, and much like FL Studio's Harmor plugin and its image synthesis capabilities, it will generate audio from the loaded-in image in the image source. Like the previous two effects of the sort, the FL Studio project needs to be playing to hear the audio. Immediately, you'll want to take note of the volume slider so that you can lower it. According to the help window, I think it's kind of like the Harmor image synthesis, and apparently the audio generator reads the pixel from left to right. What does that mean? I'm not sure, because if you move the Y chord parameter, the red bar travels up the image and seems to read the entire row of pixels for that image. This is most visible if you turn on the Show Input toggle, as it will show you the image you're using. The red line shows you the line of pixels that it is currently reading, and the green line shows you how that line is being read, I believe. Alternatively, you can change the wave from input to one of the other options. If you leave the Show Input toggle on, you can see how it works too, which is cool. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because I don't entirely know what it's used for. But you can enable Midi down here and you can play the sound with a Midi input, and it seems very buggy to me, and it voids the volume setting. I assume in favor of the Midi note volume. It's also monophonic, so you cannot play multiple notes at once. It's a bit weird. You can also automate the movement down here. If anything, I would say that it's probably used for a quick censor effect, if you want to censor some line for some video that you're editing. Automator. Oh, interesting. It looks like it's another internal controller, much like Parameter Shake, which we'll talk about in a moment, but this one seems to be a simpler version of it. This effect can automate parameters on other layers by selecting the layer from the layer index. Again, if you forgot the letter label of your layer, you can hover over the visibility toggle and it will show you the layer label in the hint panel. Similarly, to link a parameter, you can either count the parameters from top to bottom, or if you hover over the parameter, the hint panel will show you the parameter number in parentheses. This effect has 4 modules, so you can control 4 different layer/parameter combos from one effect. You can also enable and disable the layer's effect with the Enable toggle. There are a number of options for modulation type, but wave position and spec band position seem to be the ones that use the audio source. Song position seems to automate simply based on how long the song has been playing for. It seems to be a bit finicky, however. If you have a long song, you'll want to turn your mod rate down real low. In my tests, I set mine to 0.01 by typing it in myself, and I linked it to the scale parameter of an image. I started it really small by setting the mod base to 0 so that it will slowly grow as the song progressed, and I turned off the mod multiplier so that it can grow as slow as possible. There are other modulation types, but it looks like the audio-based ones are a bit too sporadic to be useful, which is probably why Parameter Shake exists. It's still pretty cool to know that this exists too. Instead of creating automation clips for simple animations, you could just use this instead and handle multiple at a time. Core dump is a faux endless code typing effect generator. I believe that's pretty much it. There are various customization settings. There's also info in the help panel if you need it. You can also load a custom image in the image source for different visuals. I don't know how to make it look like text though. Again, like one of the previous effects, you probably need to load in a letter sprite sheet or a font sprite sheet, and it'll use the information from that sprite sheet as letters, but I'm not too sure. 3D Dance Line is everyone's favorite FL-chan, but in ZGame Editor Visualizer. If you want a cute little dancing mascot in your videos, you can load her up and she has different dances that she can do if you change the dance slider. There are other customization options to try as well. The color settings work here too if you want to recolor her. If you have your own dancing character you want to use, you can load your custom sprite sheet in the image source. I don't know what the aspect ratio is though, I assume 32:64. According to the information page, it's important to know that the speed slider is not indicated by the tempo of the song, but simply the frame rate of the animation. So if you want her to dance to your song, you'll have to set the speed manually. Remember to hold Control to fine-tune the slider. Next is Fruity Industry, which for some reason renders behind everything. That can be fixed, however, by moving the layer to the far left, setting it as a buffer layer, then routing it to an image layer over everything else. Why is this the way that it is? I'm not sure, but now you can see what it is. And what it is a 3D audio spectrum. That's pretty much it. There are various customization options for it as well, including the ability to load your own 3D meshes in place of the cubes. This effect also has the thing that annoys me where there's a rotation parameter that animates the rotation of the thing, but stopping it doesn't reset its position, it just stops wherever you stopped it at. Not much to say about it, but it is kinda cool. Matcap seems to simply be another 3D mesh visualizer that you can use to stretch your loaded image source over as the material. It looks like it also projects the material from the camera, so if you rotate the object, the material doesn't follow it. I kinda like the style of pattern coloring they used in the show Chowder. The slider for this effect are interestingly not linear like the rest of them. They're sinusoidal or run on a Bezier curve, so there's a little bit of ease in and ease out to the movements when moving the sliders. Not much else to say about this one other than the scale does not go very high for some reason. I'm not really certain what this effect could be used for other than just displaying various materials over the 3D model. Param link is another simple but potentially powerful internal controller effect that lets you link one parameter to another. Select the source layer and source parameter with layer source and parameter source. This is where the movement will be copied from. Then select the target layer and parameter with layer tar and param tar. There's nothing else to say about it really, other than turning on the graph helps a lot for visualizing what the function is doing, and the position X, position Y, and scale affect the graph. Using this on a parameter that's been automated or animated by another effect is a good way to quickly animate another parameter. Param link cache can be used with param link as a sort of buffer median layer to link multiple parameters to others. That's pretty much all this does, is store slider data for linking. Param morph target is a little bit more complicated. The help window only offers an example usage but doesn't really explain much about how it works. Param morph target takes an input from the layer to the left, which I will refer to as input A, and an input from the layer to the right, input B, and it will set the parameters of a fourth layer to those input parameters, morphing in between the starting state, input A, and the ending state, input B. Are you still with me? In total, you'll need 4 sequential layers. For me, those will be layers B, C, D, and E. Layer C is your param morph target, Layer B is your input A, or your starting state, where the parameters will start. Layer D is your input B, or your ending state, where the parameters will end after the morph. And layer E is your output layer, the layer where the morph will take effect. The layers don't need to actually be in order in the workspace, but they need to be numerically or alphabetically in order, A, B, C, D, or M, N, O, P, and so on. It is recommended that you use param link cache for your input layers just so that it's easier to handle, since the only parameters that will matter are the output layers. Before enabling the param morph target, remember to copy and paste your starting parameters in the left layer, then set your end result in the right layer. Also, remember if you want to know the number of the parameter, hover over it and the hint panel in the upper left of FL Studio will show you the parameter numbers in parentheses. The last miscellaneous effect is a hefty one, not by its capabilities, but literal computational or graphical power, so be careful. I have a decent computer, graphically speaking, and I noticed FL Studio experiencing heavy frame drops when using it. Pent Up is another 3D audio visualizer that reacts to the audio source. I don't know if this will happen for everyone, but this happened for me. The first time you load up Pent Up, if you notice that nothing is happening when you hit play on your project and audio is coming through your audio source, try moving the spaceness slider a bit. Setting it back to 0 should be fine afterwards. It just needs to be updated for some reason. When it's on, you can see what it looks like and what it does, which is it creates hundreds of cubes that react to audio input. If you really want to check the veracity of my hundreds of cubes statement, and you're certain your computer can handle it, try turning up the strangeness and spaceness. It's quite the sight, but boy is it taxing on your computer. If you're ambitious enough, you can also set your own custom mesh in place of the cubes. We're halfway there now. The next category is object arrays, another large category with a variety of options for visuals containing different types of arrays of objects. I'll try to be brief with these since they're mostly visuals and are better just to play around with yourself. First is 8x8x8_eggs, an 8x8x8 grid of spherical objects, eggs apparently, that you can swap out with a custom mesh. The bottom 3 parameters offer reactivity with the selected audio source. Ball Z might be one I actually can't show you. While writing this script, I almost declared various effects broken or simply given up on trying to figure out how some of them work, but I eventually found out what the problem was, some of them in which I kept my thought process in the script so that you can hear that a little bit. This one, however, was courteous enough to tell me why it won't work, as it says, note, allowed only for GPUs that support GLSL shaders, which I would assume my graphics card has that, but because everything needs to be an NVIDIA graphics card, maybe it isn't enabled or something, and I don't know how to enable that. If it works for you, let me know what it is in the comments. Cellular blocks is another one of those large-scale texture effects, probably blended in with your background or something. Crystal Cube is an audio reactive cuboid that is created with layers of images creating the shape. Change the image source to see images creating the shape. Change the shape with a custom mesh. Cube's grasping is an effect very similar to the fruity industry, but this one actually works properly. It appears in front of the background and is visible when playing audio input. It's a 3D audio spectrum comprised of cubes, which you can replace with a custom mesh. Cube matrix is very similar to the 8x8x8_eggs effect, creating an 8x8x8 grid of 3D spheres that you can replace with your own custom mesh. Beat spins and peak knocks are the audio reactivity parameters. Death Clock 8 is an audio peak reactive effect consisting of 8 3D skull models which can be replaced with your own custom 3D mesh. Very nice. Diamond Bit is an audio reactive array of smaller arrays of 3D tetrahedrons or triangular pyramids, which you can replace with your own custom mesh. You can change the quantity of the larger array by changing the facets 3 to 6 slider. Interestingly enough, if you have a custom mesh loaded in, changing the facets will unload the mesh, so you need to select it again, but it only works for 3 and 6 facets it seems. My test models weren't showing up for the 4 and 5 facets. You can change the object density of the smaller arrays. The spacing affects the spacing of the larger array. Filaments is an effect from your nightmares. Or at least you could really make it that by changing the color and then changing the thickness of it. You can also add your own image source to create some biblically accurate angels. Glowing blocks creates an array of blocks that glow, who would have guessed, with a light object that moves across them. You can also turn on motion to make your array scroll. If you wait long enough, the light will reach the end of its path and it will just hang there for a bit, creating a rather ominous environment actually. If you flip the direction of the speed though, you can get the light moving again. Mobius eggs creates a trippy effect of seemingly infinitely scrolling spheres, or eggs I guess. Not much to this one other than some important notes. There is no alpha channel as you might notice, so your background doesn't appear in the black gaps. So you'll want to blend the layer if you want to use this over a background, or use the Julian from buffer layer to remove the black. Turning down the alpha will show your background. Changing the color will only affect the colored spheres. Mobius Sierpinski creates the same infinity effect as Mobius eggs, but with the Sierpinski carpet fractal. I will leave this effect up to you to discover. Something's telling me that all you have to do is move these sliders to see what they do. Mobius Weave is another infinite scroll effect. I'm hesitant to call any of these a Mobius strip effect, like how I imagine these are named after, because these don't quite look like Mobius strips, but I'm going to imagine that the pattern continues off in the 4th dimension at the vanishing points, and then continue the looping on the other side. So maybe. Pentascallion is an audio reactive starfish-like array of spheres that you can replace with your own image source. The last 3 parameters are the audio reactivity settings. Raymarch's 2D Sierpinski is a scrolling 3D texture of the Sierpinski carpet fractal. Raymarch Reflections is a scrolling 3D environment comprised of an endless array of rounded cubes, kinda like that thing you can do in Minecraft to look at all the blocks in the game. Personally, I'd like to see a version of this where you can load your own meshes instead of the cubes, and then maybe also have them rotate along their individual origin points. But actually, out of curiosity, I took a look at this effect in ZGame Editor, and I believe that would involve a complete rewrite of the effect, so I don't think that would be worth it. Rings is an audio-reactive array of rings comprised of cubes that you can replace with your own custom mesh. The effect starts with the peak amount set to 0, so it will not have any movement just yet. You can also move the twist and spin parameters to get more amorphic movement. You can also load in your own pictures as the texture of the cubes. Annoyingly, of course, resetting the twist and spin parameters does not reset their positions. Simplex Truchet tubing is an infinitely scrolling 3D environment comprised of these bolted tubes in a truchet pattern. Simplex Weave is an infinitely scrolling 3D environment comprised of this sleek metallic weaving pattern. Transparent 3D Noise is an interesting, almost X-ray looking effect of a 3D environment of amorphous noise blobs. Transparent ISO Slices is a 3D environment of amorphous blobs cut into slices. You can toggle No Slice to see the blobs as they are. Transparent Lattice is a 3D environment consistent of an infinite lattice structure. Lastly, the Whack-Claw Gasket is another Sierpinski fractal, this time in the Sierpinski gasket-like structure. This one looks like the Pentaskelion effect, but isn't audio-reactive like that one. The array is constructed using 3D cubes, which you can change the texture of with a custom image source. The effect also offers the ability to load a custom mesh in place of the cubes, but doing so will ruin the structure. If you alter the twist and/or space parameters and create an iteration of the fractal with the default cubes loaded, loading in your custom mesh will remove that structure. Changing these parameters again afterward will unload your mesh and return it to the default cubes, so it won't entirely work with a custom mesh, sadly. But still, this fractal can get quite intricate, so you might not want it any busier than just the cubes anyways. This next category, Particles, contains various particle-based effects. First is Bug Tails, which is a little weird. At first load, you'll be greeted with an undulating black circle. Pressing play on your audio will cause the circle to start moving around. Not very Bug Tails though. The Bug Tails themselves will appear eventually if you let the audio play out. If you move the Bug Frenzy slider, you'll see some of those titular bug tails appearing from behind the black orb. Tweak some of the parameters to see what they do. However, note that you can load in your own image source, but it's a bit weird. There are 3 different objects that you can customize with your own images, and selecting an image source will load the 3 images sequentially to fill in those objects. The image that you select will actually become the tails of the bugs. The second image, the one right after your selection in the image source, becomes the bugs themselves. Then the third image, 2 after your selection, becomes what the effect refers to as the core. Color settings affect only the bugs and their tails. Color blobs creates floating colored blob particles that are audio reactive with the sound influence parameter changing how much the shake is influenced by the audio source. F-Fluids, which I guess is how that's pronounced, is an audio-reactive particle system with what I have to say is the most needlessly scientific or even sci-fi sounding description I've ever heard for a visual effect. F-Fluids, a particle system script that uses individual particle position in space-time to determine their movements. This affects turbulent chaotic movement with an underlying organic structure. Yeah. Play with this at the risk of collapsing the space-time continuum, I suppose. Which is sort of a joke, but the information page also says that increasing the flow rate parameter too high could crash your PC, so be careful. Also note that you can add your own image source and mesh for the particles, and with enough customization, you can create a nice snowing effect that you could use with an image of a snowflake or something to create a semi-realistic snow effect. Plasma flies, I couldn't quite get to work properly. It's under the particles category, but I couldn't quite get any particles to appear. As it is now, it looks more like a muzzle flash than anything. So maybe you can use it like that instead. I got it to explode into individual stars once, but I don't even know how. Polar grid motion is the next one, and frankly, I don't know if it can be considered a particle anything. There aren't any settings or functions that would imply that it's a particle effect. You can only change the speed of the animation in addition to the color controls, of course, which makes it more of a video than a particle effect. It is quite satisfying though. Reactive flow is another audio reactive effect reacting to the audio spectrum of your audio source. It's an interesting effect for sure. I'd recommend messing around with the settings to see what they affect. If you want more information on them, this effect has the most detailed help menu of any of the effects so far, even including the color and transform settings. So I'll leave you with that and just say that you can also import your own mesh, but the effect is kind of small to really see it. Also, the peak effect distorts the mesh, so if you do end up wanting to use it, it may look weird. Also, a word of warning ahead of time with this effect, the position X and Y sliders do not do even remotely what you might expect them to do. The position X slider starts at 0%, which should already raise a red flag, and increasing it does not translate the thing whatsoever. And just in case, if you don't know what I mean by translate, it's another word for to move in mathematics, but instead it rotates along the x-axis, which means it rotates front to back in the direction of the z-axis. So what does the y-axis position slider do? Well, of course, it translates the object along the x-axis with inverse controls. The hint menu does sort of warn you of this as well. It does create an interesting effect when viewed from this angle though, max position X. Reactive mob is a bit of an interesting one. It's another audio reactive effect. The particles are very clearly visible this time, in addition to two large icosahedrons that sway back and forth in the background. This is another one of those effects where there are just a lot of parameters that are best left to you all to play around with and discover. Likewise, this one also has a detailed help menu that offers a lot of information. You can load in your own meshes, and yes, that is plural because your first mesh that you have selected becomes the large objects in the background, while your second mesh in the list becomes the particle effects flying around. You can load in an image source, but I don't think that's used here. Also, something to note, these 3D mesh objects aren't meant to appear smooth, as this is the intended aesthetic for this effect, with the wireframes being mostly visible. In the same sense, if you adjust the alpha, just the fill of the shape will fade out, but the wireframes will persist. If you lower the alpha, then lower the wire mode, you can get the small particle effects to fade away, but the large objects will still remain as wireframes. If you want to truly fade away this effect, I recommend routing it to an image layer as a buffer layer, though apparently this changes the way the alpha works for that layer, which is weird. The last particle effect is strange acid, which I can best describe like this. Have you ever seen one of those videos of people demonstrating how certain frequencies played on a sine wave can generate patterns in sand poured over a sheet of metal placed over the speaker the frequencies are being played on? Very interesting stuff. This is technically a particle effect when you think about it. And at the bottom, these 4 attractor parameters can be altered to generate similar patterns, or automated to shift constantly. The effect is audio reactive, but it's a bit weird at first. I'll try to explain what I think is happening, knowing absolutely nothing about how it's programmed. To enable the audio reactivity, you need to move the peak reactivity slider. It's at 0% to start out with, which I believe means some settings set to -1, because as you start increasing it, you'll see the audio reactivity starts. But it's inverted. It starts bright, then dims to the audio peaks. Increasing it more moves it from -1 to 0, which seems to be about 15%, because that's where it seems to be fighting the inversion and almost appearing fully off. Increasing it further from here gives it the appropriate effect of increasing in brightness to the audio. To further my point about the math behind this effect, going another 15% up to 30% seems to be where it hits +1, so it starts bright and then gets even brighter to the audio. Increasing it past this threshold, you can really see this effect exaggerated. Again, this effect is best played with to see what everything does. You can also check the help menu for more information regarding the parameters. You can also load in your own custom image source and it will replace the individual particles, so transparent PNGs will work nicely. The next category is patterns, but because of how simple it is, I don't want to give it its own chapter, so I'm just going to talk about it briskly before going into the next category, the peak effects. The patterns category is exactly that, a long list of scrolling patterns with varying levels of customizability. You can use these as backgrounds, though for more spice, I'd recommend blending it over your background or cropping and masking it for an isolated effect. I don't really know what else I should say about them. There are a lot of them, and they are largely all the same in their settings, so I guess I'll just scroll through the different patterns here and we'll move right into the next category, the peak effects. How the patterns category was rather self-explanatory towards the visual aspect of this, peak effects is rather self-explanatory towards the audio aspect. These effects will provide various auto-reactive effects. As such, I'll go ahead and show them off, but these will also largely benefit off of your own customization. The first of the peak effects is the audio plane, which is just that, a 3D plane that reacts to audio. There are a few customization options, most notably if you want to extend the range of the plane's reactivity, you can increase the grid size slider. If you want a more exaggerated peak effect, you can increase the amplitude slider. This effect also allows you to choose two different colors that sort of blend together in the plane. I don't think it's actually blending them together, but parts of the plane use color A, other parts use color B, and because of the size of the grid, the colors sort of blend together visually. Alright, I forgot, I can decrease the grid size again. The A color options change the horizontal lines, and the B colors change the vertical lines. Fluidity is a sort of fluid simulation that creates ripples that are audio reactive. There's much to talk about with this effect. You can change the color of the liquid and perspective of the camera. Let's move on. Joy dividers is a gently oscillating audio reactive plane, much larger by default than the audio plane effect. There isn't much to talk about with this effect either. The sliders at the bottom of the panel control the visual of the plane, with break causing a crazy effect. You can change the color of the lines with the color settings, of course. But you can also load an image source that will be used to extrapolate color information to add color to the lines, meaning you won't really see your image, you'll just see generally the colors from it. Now we're getting into the effects you've most likely seen because they're the most commonly used effects. Linear is your standard linear representation of an audio spectrum. As you can see, there are quite a few customization options for this. I'll go over some of the more notable ones. Firstly, you might notice there's a little bar here, a floor per se. representing where the bars will originate from. If you want to remove that and have the spectrum appear from nowhere, you can enable Hide Floor. You can alternate the design of the bars by changing the draw from bars to curve. If you want more bars for a sleeker audio spectrum, you can increase the band slider or decrease it for a more retro feel. You can create a more dramatic peak effect if you increase the power. You can change the direction of the peaks by changing the polarity. You can also load an image source to display on your audio spectrum. To view it, you need to toggle Enable Bitmap, and then the bitmap settings can be used to change the image specifically. Those are all the main settings I figured I should mention. The other settings seem self-explanatory, and I'll leave those up to you to mess around with. Peak map is next. On initial load, it will appear as another audio spectrum. It looks pretty interesting as it is, especially if you go down to mask mode and set it to one of the mix options, normal mix or inverse mix. Then if you start messing with the blend mode and the mask mix, you can get some interesting blend effects with your background image. You can also change the data mode to change how the effect reacts to the audio. But those are just the basic effects. If you want to unlock the full potential of this effect, you'll want to load up a custom image source. With an image loaded, this effect will read the image and convert it to a heat map, I think, or maybe just an RGB map, whatever it's actually called. It converts it into readable data that it will use to recreate the audio reactivity effect on the image. If you want to know more specifics, you can see what it's doing in the help panel. If you want to see what the effect sees, at the bottom you can enable Preview Map, and it'll show you what it converted the image to so that it can use that data. If you want an interesting effect from this, I'd recommend setting the image source to be the same as your background image. This effect stretches images to fill the aspect ratio. Keep that in mind if you do want to use this. You might need to resize the image here, or opt to stretch in your background image if it doesn't match your video's aspect ratio. Once you get it to match the background, the audio reactivity will appear to emphasize your background image. Don't forget to mess around with the blend mode and data mode to get different effects. The main alpha controls the alpha blend of the loaded image. Rear alpha controls the background image. From there, you can mess around with the other settings to achieve different effects. Peak Me is a rather straightforward retro audio spectrum visualizer. You can also load your own image to be used as the bars, or markers as they refer to it as. The alpha slider here will control the fade of the markers only, and not the trail effect. Polar is another well-known effect you may have seen before. It's your standard radial appearing audio spectrum effect. As such, there isn't much to mention with this one. Most of the parameters are self-explanatory. The band slider increases or decreases the number of lines in the spectrum to increase or decrease its detail. The polarity slider changes the direction of the reactivity. You might consider setting it to be entirely on the outside if you want to have your logo appearing in the center. Threshold determines the level at which audio input will cause reactivity. Increase it for less, decrease it for more. Magnitude creates a more dramatic reaction to the audio. You can change the color of the effect as well, but you can also load your own custom image source that will be used to extrapolate color information to colorize the effect. It should be noted that if your image has an alpha channel, that too will be incorporated in the color determination, meaning you might have some transparent parts of your audio spectrum, so keep that in mind. But I don't know if anyone will be using transparent PNGs or GIFs as an image source for this. You can also use a video source to have an animated effect on your colors. Next is the reactive sphere, an interesting 3D take on an audio spectrum. Not really much to say about this one. The effect is how it is. You can increase the power slider to increase the effect of the audio reactivity, but there is a maximum range to the effect before it starts clipping, and if you turn it too high, you won't really get much of an effect. Reflected peaks is a sort of angular audio reactive effect. Pretty cool effect, but not much to talk about. Changing the angle slider doesn't increase the number of angles to create a smoother effect, but it does create some interesting effects. The thickness slider changes the thickness of the lines, but it's inverted. Lower for thicker, higher for thinner, until it disappears. You can also use your own image to use for color data, but it seems not to be as accurate as some of the other effects. Spline peaks is another simple audio reactive effect that sort of resembles a heart monitor effect, if you want to use it like that. The alpha slider works pretty well at fading the effect in and out, but be careful with the scale slider. It starts off at max, and if you lower it, you can see the effect clips at the edges, so it's either full screen or nothing, unless you want to use it in a masked location. Maybe put it inside a screen or something to make it look like a heart monitor. Stereo waveform is pretty self-explanatory, an audio waveform split into left channel and right channel. An interesting feature of this that I would have never expected, you can load a 3D mesh and it will flatten it and use that as the frame of the waveform. To see it better, you can increase the fill size to increase the thickness of the line, and you can see how it's rendering the model. That makes more sense as to why this effect had 3 dimensions of rotation, X, Y, and Z. Now, if you want to talk about audio spectrums that everyone uses, stripe peaks is the cream of the crop. This one effect, I think, has been the effect of most EDM posting channels, at least from what I've noticed. And it makes sense why, because there's a lot of motion going on. It's subtle yet flashy at the same time. Where do I even start with this one? Well, this effect is created by layering multiple audio spectrums on slight delays. You can edit each layer individually, change the slice with select slice. There are 5 slices to choose from. The slices are numbered from center outward, so slice 1 will change the settings of the main origin layer, and slice 5 will change the settings of the outermost layer. You'll notice that changing the power settings for slice 1 affects the entire effect, but the same section changes when altering slices 2 to 5, changing to altering the offset effects. You can also toggle draw origin to remove the center fill of the circle and have your own logo on the inside. What I would do when I used to use this effect, however, to add slightly more interest to the logo in the center, I would choose whatever color I wanted for the center, lower the layer opacity until it was mostly transparent, and then I would place my logo on top of it. That way there's a bit of a distinction between the background and the logo, like giving it a nice backdrop, while also keeping it subtle. I suppose you could also just place your logo over the effect as well. Most of the other parameters should be self-explanatory. You might want to increase the frequency range to create more of a response to the audio. Threshold as well you might want to mess with to have more of a response to your audio, but don't lower it too much or the effect won't really do much. Changing the size will change the size of the entire effect, while changing the origin size will cause only the center to change size, allowing the other slices to breathe more in the effect. It might be worth messing around with if you want a more unique effect. Next up is Vector Scope, which I believe is an audio reactive effect specializing in the spatial mixing of audio. So how much left channel, how much right channel, and how much in between the audio is. This effect is, in fact, pretty self-explanatory, but if you don't believe me, then don't just take my word for it, it even says so in the help panel. I'll link Jerobeam's video in the comments so that you can all take a look at it. Amazing stuff. That whole album is awesome. Wave Simple is a simple audio waveform visualizer, very similar to Reflected Peaks. So similar, in fact, that they share the same help panel. Looks like someone copy and pasted something here. Looks like someone copy and pasted something here. A Julian oscilloscope is a basic simulation of an oscilloscope. It starts off reading the left channel, it seems, which you can change down here in source to right or mid. Most of the settings should be rather self-explanatory, except window size, which seems to change the line's reactivity to the audio. The update rate increases going down and decreases going up in the slider. This affects how quickly the visual effect responds to audio, kind of like the frame rate. At the bottom are the most notable effects, where you can create clones of the lines to have a more interesting visual effect. Julian Peak Shapes is another simple radial audio spectrum visualizer that you may have seen being used, but not as much as some of the other ones. Mostly the same standard settings for this type of effect. You can get some interesting visuals if you mess with the parameters at the bottom. You can apparently load in your own image source, but I couldn't quite figure out how to get it to work properly. In Peak Mod, I see that I can change it to image, but I wasn't quite getting my image to appear anywhere. Lastly is Julian Waveform, which is a rather customizable audio waveform visualizer. Most of what's here are your standard settings. You can swap between radial and linear renderings with the circle mode setting. Changing the draw mode will change how the waveform is rendered. You can load your own image source, and to view it, toggle the Use Image setting down here. From there, you can already see your image making up the audio waveform, but if you want to see it more clearly, you can increase the power and set the draw mode to fill. If you want to outline around the waveform while rendering your image, you can toggle off the image stroke option down here, or toggle it on and get rid of it. A bit backward, but what can you do? And you will notice this outline following the waveform. If you increase the bands, however, the outline will start to disappear. The image size, image X, and image Y parameters confused me a bit at first, because I thought they didn't work at first, but apparently they just don't actively update the image. Once you've set the image settings how you want it, changing the image source then changing it back seems to update the image. Speaking of updates, the update setting changes how the waveform handles playback, changing direction and speed. Back means the wave will travel from right to left, while front travels left to right. However, front doesn't have the same scrolling effect that back does, having a more stationary updating effect. The speed of the update is handled by the BPM of the song, which seems to be the better setting to choose from. Otherwise, you could set it to free and change the free update percentage to change how you want the speed of the update to be. But the changes are very sensitive, and you'll likely want to keep it all the way to the left. The next category is a short one containing various physics-based effects. Although it's a short one, I'll probably keep it to its own chapter because the next one is going to be another hefty one. The first effect is Cage, an audio-reactive cube containing smaller, constantly spawning physics objects. The large cube reacts to an audio signal and not necessarily any peak information, so as long as there is audio playing, the cube will proceed to move in an erratic and unpredictable sequence of motions. You can change the intensity of the cube's motions with the rotation speed slider. It doesn't necessarily only affect the rotation speed, since part of the cube's erratic motions can have it spinning very fast or very slow, so I think it is best described as an intensity slider. The boxes spawning inside the cube seem to spawn to the BPM of the FL Studio project. Other than that, they don't have any unique audio reactivity that I've noticed. They spawn as physics objects and are at the mercy of the larger cube's movements. You can increase the total number of cubes currently spawned with the number of boxes slider. Moving it to 0 will clear out the box of the smaller boxes. You can also increase or decrease the gravity of the cubes so that they react more within the cage. It should be noted that if you try to reset the parameters of this effect, either by Alt left clicking or right clicking and selecting reset, these parameters don't reset to their default states. Instead, for some reason, the effect zeroes out the parameters. If you want to reset them back to their default states, change to a different effect and then change back. You can change the color of the cage with the color settings, or you can also project an image onto the cage with an image source. I say it like that because it looks like it creates an HDRI around the cube, and the cube reflects the surrounding image onto it, instead of simply setting the material of the faces to be your image as most of the 3D effects have done. Alternatively, if you would like the cage gone and only have the cubes bouncing around, you can increase the lightness slider to only make the cage disappear, instead of the alpha, which affects everything, of course. Lastly, you can load a custom mesh if you want, which will replace the cage object and the smaller cubes, but the collision will all remain the same, so they will all still maintain their cuboid hitboxes and only visually change to be your mesh. Interesting effect overall. I'm curious to see if anyone will use this effect, especially since it doesn't really seem like it creates much of a visual. The physics reactions aren't very dramatic, so if you want a visual that just does things, this could be for you. Columns is another audio reactive effect that reacts mainly to the audio signal. I don't think I've noticed any audio peak information translating into anything here. The dynamics of the audio, how loud or quiet it is, basically just indicates how intense the reaction is. The reaction being those columns appearing from the ground object. Cubes spawn over these columns and, well, do physics things. There's not much to this effect either. The spawning of the cubes in this one, unlike the last effect, don't correlate to anything and can be changed with the spawn speed parameter. You can enable the scene rotation with the rotation speed slider. The power slider will affect how intensely the columns shoot upward, effectively tossing the cubes around more dramatically. Gravity again increases the gravity of the cubes, and the columns apparently, which makes it so that the objects are either more or less floaty. If you want more movement, you'll probably want to increase the gravity so the objects get tossed around more. Lastly, there's the glow slider, which increases the effect of the light reflecting off the ground object, which seems to be emitting from the camera, so turning it up too high might be blinding. Something interesting to note is that this effect doesn't have any alpha settings, which is odd. Also, much like the last effect, careful when trying to reset these sliders back to their default settings, because instead, resetting only zeroes out the parameters. You can also add your own custom mesh, but, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. Height field is next, and it is largely the same effect as columns, but this time it's a scrolling effect, and I believe this one is reactive to spectrum data from the audio. But the scrolling speed is a bit slow for me to really verify that definitively. It appears as though the scrolling speed is tied to the project tempo, which I assume, because of this, causes some silly effects if you start scrolling through the song while it's reacting. And since the columns effect seems to use a similar script, it also has the same quirk. Not really useful, but just something funny to notice. Anyway, moving on. The last physics effect is ragdoll. Honestly, these physics effects are interesting, but I imagine they are just here to demonstrate the physics capabilities of ZGame Editor. I'd be curious to see people creating new physics-based effects in ZGame Editor that I feel could actually be used in an audio visualizer setting. I don't know what that would be, but of these 4 choices, they seem to be more gimmicky than actually practical. Ragdoll is one of those effects. As you can see, this effect is an audio-reactive 3D ragdoll model comprised of cylinders and spheres. I point this out specifically because these are 2 different models. You can load your own meshes, and it will load the first 2 that you've added. The first one, the one you have selected, will replace the spheres, and the second one will replace the cylinders. These 3D models come in 2 materials, default and some sort of wood material. I point this out because you can load your own image source and it appears to only replace the default model. This effect is audio reactive to the peaks of your audio source, but only the topmost cylinder, pulling the rest of the model and causing your physics reaction. And I mean, that's it. If you're using this effect, I would love to see it. But anyway, now on to the nitty-gritty of ZGame Editor Visualizer, the post-process effects. Have you ever heard the phrase, "we'll do it in post"? Post-processing is a phase in most video production, video editing pipelines that occurs right at the end of everything. It's the icing on the cake. It's the cherry on top. It's the, whatever other idioms I could use to imply that any post-process effect will affect the entire project. So it's important to know where you want your effects to go and what you want your effects to affect. If you recall, any effects loaded on the right of the workspace will appear over and affect all of the layers beneath it, which is to the left. All of the post-process effects will do that. So you have 2 options when it comes to using them. For some effects, you might simply want to make note of which layers you're putting it in front of. Otherwise, you might want to group the effect with the desired layer using buffers. I guess I have no choice but to go over some of that here, but as I said, I plan on making a video focused entirely on those, but let's take a look at the effects we'll be dealing with here. Most of them are rather self-explanatory, but there are a lot of them. So let's get started. First is ASCII, which we're right out of the gate with one of those simple self-explanatory effects. It's an effect that uses letters, numbers, and symbols to recreate the images and videos underneath it. That's right, it works with videos as well. This is one of those effects that you might want to use in a group as a buffer layer. To set that up, it's quite simple, and you can use this setup for similar visual effects as well. Take the image you want to give the effect to, move it to the left of your background image, take the post-process effect you want and move it in between the desired image and the background image, then set it as to buffer. You'll see that both layers turn green and a small output preview will appear at the bottom of the buffer layer. Now just add another image layer over your background layer and select the output from that buffer layer. Output from layer D in this case, but it will also have the name you gave the layer. And there you go. This effect, however, draws over a black background. Toggle the transparent option and the background will go away, and there you go. We've isolated this post effect into just one layer. From here, you can customize the effect within the post-process effect, or you can edit it using the image layer it's routed to, which won't affect how the effect is working. The rest of the ASCII effect is pretty simple. Set it to grayscale, change the character size, or invert the color. Let's move on. Audio shake is next. Surely you've seen this effect countless times in audio visualizers. As a post-process audio reactive effect, this effect causes everything underneath it to pulse to the audio signal from the selected audio source, whether it be from the master channel or just a kick or snare input. Personally, this effect is pretty intense to begin with, so I'd recommend turning the amount slider pretty low for just a subtle effect. Alternatively, apparently this is really just the legacy mode that's this intense. Switching it to normal changes how the effect reacts and makes it more manageable. In normal mode, you can see that a speed slider appears that affects the speed of the push and pull effect of the pulse. Or if you prefer more control over this effect, you can set it to frequency range, and a minimum and maximum slider will appear so that you can tailor it to how you want it to react. Again, this is an effect that you could use as a buffer effect. Set it up the same way as the last one and you'll see that it creates a black background. Toggle the transparent option to remove the black background and you have an image that's audio reactive on its own. Here's something you might consider using this for. Not too long from now, we'll cover a similar effect to some of the ones we've seen before, where you can affect specific parameters on other layers, but this one will also be audio reactive, so you can make certain parameters pulse to the music. By linking the scale of the image to that effect, you can pulse the image to the music, but then if you want to reposition that image, you'll get an unsavory effect that I can actually show you here. If you wanted to reposition this as your logo in the corner of the screen, you may notice that the center of this effect is still anchored to the center of the aspect ratio instead of the center of the image, how you might want it to be, causing the image to pulse at an angle as it is pulsing outward from the origin of the effect. Having this effect output to its own image layer actually fixes this issue. If I recenter the logo image and ensure the scale doesn't clip the edge of the frame, using the output layer I can reposition the image to the corner how I want it, and then you will see that the pulse is now originating from the center of the logo instead of the center of the whole frame.
My fangs into your neck until I stop feeling a pulse. I'm a werewolf.
Lastly, with this effect, if you did want this effect as a post-process effect on your full project or just in front of your background image, how I usually have it, you can control the alpha of everything underneath it. Using it as a buffer layer, you can use the routed image layer to control the alpha as well. Well then, that was a lot of information, so let's move on to a simpler effect. Blooming is a customizable bloom effect that you can use to accentuate moments of your song, especially when using a parameter control effect to automate the bloom level to react when you want. Usually, I'll use this effect as extra emphasis on only the background layer since it mainly affects the lighter portions of an image. The rest of the settings offer personal customizability to your tastes. To get a more prominent effect, it layers iterations of the effect over itself to make it brighter and brighter. Change the iteration slider to make it subtler or overbearing. Dilation, yes, spelled like that, causes the image to dilate and spread as part of the bloom effect. Flicker adds a flicker effect. The color effects don't seem to do anything here, which I guess is why there's the bloom hue slider, but even that doesn't seem to have too much of an effect on the bloom. Blur is a simple blur effect. Yep. Moving on. Color cycle palette seems to be a color grading post-processing effect. Choose between two operation modes, HSL adjust or hue saturation and lightness, or gradient map. HSL adjust lets you set your colors using the hue, saturation, and lightness sliders. Go figure. And use the alpha slider along with the blend mode to blend the colors with your image the way you want it. You can also add some noise with the noise slider. Switch to the gradient map operation to use a loaded image source. I won't pretend to know exactly how this all works, but I believe this effect extrapolates color information from your image instead of wholly using the image as is. Change the gradient select to change between the different methods of color extrapolation. Again, I don't know the technical description of what's going on here, I can only explain it based on what I see. Changing back to the default image source, you can see better what's going on, I suppose. The gradient select changes the overall color gradient that is extracted from the image. Change the preset select to change the way the gradient is handled and mixed, maybe. I don't know, I think I'll let you figure out the rest from here. I'll just say that you can change the cycle mode to create an interesting effect if you set it to automatic. If you leave it on manual, you can automate the cycle slider to achieve the same effect. On automatic, this slider will be replaced with cycle speed. Dot matrix sort of does the same thing that the ASCII effect does, but with a halftone effect, created with dots. Change the resolution to change the size of the dots. Oddly enough, you can load a custom mesh for this, but I can't entirely tell what it does, because there are no controls for the mesh, and it looks like the effect tries to wrap around the mesh, but it doesn't seem to work properly. Dub Switcher Color Shaper is another color grading effect with immense control over the different color channels. This time I definitely won't try to pretend like I know what's happening, because there's a lot of things happening. All I can tell you is that each group controls the red, green, blue, and alpha channels. The top of the effect controls all channels, so I think that means it controls the luminance. If you really want to tailor your color grading to your specific tastes, you probably know how to manipulate the thresholds and stops for all of these. If you're like me and you're looking for quick enhancements to your colors, try changing the tension and strengths of the channels you want to edit. Remember to hold control when moving sliders for finer control over them. Dub Switcher Drop Shadow is an effect that adds a drop shadow to an element, so you might want to use this in a buffer layer, group it with an image layer that you want to have a drop shadow, and then route that out to an image layer. Remember, even though this effect creates an effect that appears under the layer, this effect still affects the layer that is under it, to the left of it, so you'll want to set this layer as your buffer layer and have your image layer to the left of it. Most of the parameters here should be self-explanatory, and if not, you can hover over them and find more information about them in the hint panel in the top left. Dub Switcher Fast HSV is a simple hue, saturation, and value editing effect for whatever image you want it to affect if you want to recolor something very quickly. Dub Switcher Fast Static is a simple effect that creates a customizable television static effect. By default, the noise type is on long. I recommend switching it to any of the other ones for a more recognizable effect. If you want an interesting effect from this, you can load a custom image source to use as the mask, set the Use Mask to 4 All or 4 Distortion, and set the distortion to max. Changing the mask amount to max, it uses your image as a mask and will only have the static effect within that mask. You can fade in and out the effect by changing the distortion slider. Dub Switcher Field Generator, if I understand it correctly, can be used to convert an image into a mask image that can be useful for other layers. In Dub Switcher's own words, it is a tool for generating a distance and direction mask from an input image, or for conforming an image to the background, if you know what that means. Also, in DubSwitcher's own words though, this effect is a relatively expensive effect on slower machines, and to use sparingly, so be careful trying to mess with this one. Again, this effect has further information in the hint panel if you need more help. DubSwitcher Inverter is a simple color inverter offering the ability to invert per color channel. I don't think there's much more to say about this effect, other than you can load a custom image source to use as a mask with mask mode. I also managed to set up a silly sequence of buffer layers and masks to create an interesting masked effect from any image you want. Apparently, if you load an image with an alpha channel into the Boolean mask effect, it will actually treat it as a mask regardless of if not looking like one, but it will be a negative mask. Using DubSwitcher Inverter, you can invert it to a positive mask and have your image or texture appear inside the mask. Again, I know I keep bringing these things up and then say I'll go into more detail about them in later videos, but I hope if you're still watching that you're starting to understand that ZGame Editor Visualizer is actually really powerful, especially once you start understanding buffer layers and masking to take it several steps further. DubSwitcher Jitter Glitch creates a very intense, customizable screen glitch effect that also accepts a mask in the image source. Feel free to mess around with the settings to your liking. DubSwitcher Linear Blur creates a linear blur effect. Yep. You'll find that these post-processing effects are generally self-explanatory because these effects aren't really meant to be big and show-offy like the other ones. They're usually meant for a solitary purpose so that you can use them in conjunction with other effects to achieve the desired result on a fine level. DubSwitcher Smudge takes your image and creates a paint smudging effect when you mess with the shift parameter. DubSwitcher Soft Glitch creates a more subdued screen glitch effect compared to the DubSwitcher Jitter Glitch effect. You can also load in an image source to use as a mask in this one as well. DubSwitcher Solidify is an interesting effect that I hesitate to consider a post-processing effect since it doesn't work for the entire project, but only for whatever image you load in the image source. It turns an image into a pseudo 3D version of itself using math to read the image and turn it into depth data. Then using an extrude modifier, similar to the one in Blender, you can make it seem as though it is a 3D image. Play around with this one as well. You could use it for some interesting visuals perhaps. DubSwitcher Starburst takes your background layer and creates a sort of bursting luminance effect from it by also adding a shake effect. A bit excessive, but you can tone it down with the boost parameter. DubSwitcher White Hole is a unique distortion effect. There are quite a few customization options you can look through. Feel free to play around with them. Most of DubSwitcher's effects either have more information in the help menu or by hovering over the parameters and look in the hint panel, so if you need more information you can check there. Edge Detect is a post-processing effect that detects the edges or hard lines in an image. From there, I don't know what you might want to do with that information, but you can further process the effect to create some unique effects, I'm sure. The best way I can describe the extruded video image effect is if you've ever seen or had those toys that were a board of plastic pins with a transparent plastic sheet preventing the pins from being pushed out, and you can put your hand in it and it would retain the shape of your hand. I believe there are also full body versions of those as well. Imagine being able to automate each of those pins into forming shapes and making a video out of them. This effect is pretty much that. If you did a video image, or if you want your entire video to have it, then that works too, and the pins will automate to have your underlying video playback. You can change the scale to make the pins larger or smaller. You can also automate the depth slider and link it to an audio input and have the extrusion animate to your music. Frame blur is your basic video frame interpolation effect. If you have a video that's a lower frame rate and you want it to appear smoother, you would add a subtle blur between each frame to fake the connection between the two frames to make it seem smoother than it actually is. Luminosity, I gotta say, is a basic desaturation effect. Whether or not that is the same thing as luminosity, or maybe I'm misunderstanding what that is, I don't know, but this effect can be pretty useful too. I use it in a song to emphasize the music. Sometimes subtle effects can go a long way. On the opposite end of my previous statement for the previous effect, notebook drawings is an overhaul effect that turns your background layers into a pencil notebook drawing with varying amounts of color. A pretty cool effect, I think. Finally, we're here. Parameter shake is often the effect I would refer to when suggesting you link a parameter to this effect to get it to react to your music. At the very top, you see that you can choose your audio source. There are two modules in this effect, Shake 1 and Shake 2. Each of those will react to whichever audio source you've chosen. First, you'll want to select your layer. If you've forgotten the letter of the layer you want, remember you can hover over the visibility toggle for that layer and the hint panel will show you which one it is. Similarly, you will need to link your parameter, which you can also find by hovering your cursor over the parameter and seeing it in the hint panel. I'm going to pick the scale, which is param 7. I highly recommend setting your layer and parameter first before enabling your effect. You will see that the first option says Shake 1 off. This means that the effect is currently disabled. The moment I start moving the sliders, you will notice that the scale slider on my linked parameter snaps to 0. If you have the effect enabled and you go scrolling through the different layers and parameters, you might accidentally reset or zero out all of your parameters, and I'll just say, the Ctrl-Z undo in ZGame Editor Visualizer isn't the best. Now, the reason this parameter is zeroed out is because the base level is on 0. You will want to set where you want your parameter to start from. Moving the slider with your project pause, you won't actually see anything moving. Pressing play in general will allow you to see the parameters changing. Something mildly infuriating I've noticed with this effect that I would like to point out. The base level slider is on a different metric than the parameter you're trying to control. If I turn off the effect and reset the image's scale slider, you see it snaps to the center, roughly 50% or 0.5. I say roughly because I can even show you what it is actually at by right-clicking it and selecting type in value. You see it's actually 0.5, 0.0000762, and so on and so forth. But that's close enough to 0.5 as we need it. Now if I copy that value and paste it in the base level slider, the base level slider will be set to 0.5, but in no iteration of the Shake 1 level slider will you be able to get the scale slider also at 0.5, unless you have the shake slider off, but then it isn't working. Even if I move it the slightest amount so that it ticks over from off to level, meaning that it's on, you'll see the scale parameter is different. You might be able to get in close, but it would take a lot of minute dialing in of the two sliders to do that. And that's another thing I want to talk about is how you will need to tune the base level and shake level sliders together to achieve the desired effect you want. The base level sets where you want the parameter to start off at, but the shake level affects the intensity of the reaction to the audio. For some reason, moving the level slider will change the link parameter as well. So it's a constant fight between the base level slider and the shake level slider to get it to where you want your effect to start, and the shake level slider affects how intense you want the reaction to be. So unless you want an insane shake effect from your reaction, which in some cases you might, like for a blur or bloom effect, I'd recommend having it a bit lower for a more subtle shake effect. The other settings you have, since they're modular, I'll just look at Shake 1. Shake 1M is the mode that the effect reacts to. Peak by default, but there are a few other options as well. Stop Shake 1 freezes the effect where it is for a seamless stop-start effect. Shake 1 wrap determines whether or not the parameter wraps around back to the other end when it reaches the max or min range. Something like rotation or hue sliders would work well for this since they usually have seamless rollovers. Shake 1 start and Shake 1 end allows you to set a start measure and end measure to when this effect will take over. As previously mentioned, when the effect is on, the shake level parameter seizes control of the link parameter, disallowing any direct alteration of it once it is within its control. Setting a start and end measure will make it so that it won't take control of the parameter until it starts, and will release control once it ends. So, say you want your image to do a casual zoom in before switching to an audio shake throughout the song, then for the end you want the image to zoom out again. You need the effect to not be active when you automate those zooms. Shake 1 init and set init 1 are not British parameters, but since the effect takes control over the parameter, this includes what the parameter was initialized as being, meaning where the parameter will be set to at the start of the project. You can choose to set the parameter's initialization here if it is a visually important parameter like the scale or rotation that might look weird when starting the project. I'm not too sure what Shake 1 hold does, or I'm sorry, Skake 1 and Skake 2 hold. The disabled parameters become available when you select a shake method that relies on speed and not the audio input, like the BPM or circle X or square wave. This is the rate at which the parameter moves. Point Cloud Default is another effect that takes your image and projects it in a way that tries to make it seem like a 3D image. This one in particular takes your image either as a post-process effect or your image source, and converts it into point cloud data similar to a Gaussian splat and attempts to reconstruct it as a 3D image. You can use the amp slider to amplify this effect. The next effects, point cloud high and point cloud low, are the same things but with a slightly different algorithm to creating the point clouds. All three of these effects have a well fleshed out help menu if you would like more information. Projection creates an effect similar to projecting your image onto a screen or board that then allows you to reposition it in some funky ways, using cardinal coordinates, north, east, south, and west, to distinguish which corner inside you're controlling. This can be used as either a post-process effect or with a loaded image source as well. Raindrops is a super basic rainy screen simulation. Amount controls the amount of rain droplets, while blur controls the level of the blur effect. I'd recommend using this alongside a recoloring effect for a somber blue or gray overcast feeling. RGB shift creates a sort of chromatic aberration effect when increasing the amount slider. You can also change the angle of the effect. By the way, these post-processing effects that have the transparent toggle often means that when using it in a buffer layer, it creates that black background I mentioned earlier. Toggling it will replace it with an alpha channel, allowing you to use it over other images. Scale lines is an effect that I think attempts to replicate an old CRT television, but looks more like it's trying to recreate paper as well. You can even add vertical lines with the scanlines X, which I assume means because they iterate horizontally along the x-axis and not the lines themselves travel along the x-axis, which you can use to create a graph paper effect. Transition effects is a basic effect that can be used, believe it or not, to create transition effects. I've used this effect once mainly because I was curious about it as well. Being a post-process effect, it will transition between whatever is loaded beneath the effect and the image loaded in as the image source. If you would like to keep it to your backgrounds only, you would need a buffer layer group for your backgrounds. I'll show a little bit of the segment in my video where I use this effect here, because I use this effect to create a sort of slideshow effect. Which leads me to reminding you that you can automate the currently loaded image source and mesh in a layer by copy and pasting each position into your automation clip. If you wanted to recreate this effect, what you would do after grouping your backgrounds into a buffer layer group, you control the progress of the transition effect with the transition slider. Left is the background, right is the image source. When automating the transition slider, after it reaches the right side, you'll want to automate the image source of your background layer to change to the new image. Then, at the same time, or whenever you feel is right, reset the transition slider to the left, Then, if you want another slide or image, automate the image source of the transition effects layer to your new image, and then repeat ad infinitum if you want. The other parameters are customization options for your transition effects. Vignette is what I consider to be a broken if simple vignette effect. Why broken? Personally, I enjoy slowly fading in effects, especially if they are as dramatic as this vignette effect, so the fact that this alpha slider does not work has irritated me for actual years ever since I first started using ZGame Editor Visualizer. But lucky for you, I plan on making a tutorial video dedicated to the vignette effect on how to get it to work for you in more ways than just the outer radius and inner radius sliders. But that will come after the buffer layers tutorial, so stick around for that. Watercolor is an effect that gives your image the appearance of being painted using watercolor paintings. Customize the parameters to your liking. Wet ink spiral is an interesting effect, using what I imagine is some sort of fluid simulation adjacent algorithm to create this spiral effect that looks to be made of wet ink, and the lines recreate the image line underneath it, but only with the most detail, as the spiral doesn't offer the most detail when recreating the image. That is, unless you turn the spiral slope setting all the way down, and it's almost pretty much a 1-to-1, but you start to lose the spiral effect at that scale. Boolean audio shake is another effect like the audio shake effect, of course, but this one offers way more control over how you want the effect to look and react. I think it's interesting that this effect has a bounce easing animation effect to the end of its audio reactivity. Boolean bloom, as you might notice with most of the following effects by Boolean, is another bloom effect but with more customizability. Boolean blur as well is a blur effect with more customization. This one you can even use an image source as a mask. Boolean color correction, unlike the dub switcher counterpart, dub switcher color shaper, is a simpler color grading effect, sort of like the dub switcher fast HSV, as you can see the hue, saturation, and value parameters here as well, in addition to brightness, gamma, and contrast. Boolean drop shadow is a slightly simpler drop shadow effect to the dub switcher drop shadow one. Boolean handheld is your standard handheld camera effect in ZGame Editor Visualizer. I like keeping it subtle, of course, turning the amount slider down. Also, personally, I don't like it when I can see the black borders of beyond the image's size, so I recommend zooming in with the zoom parameter just enough so that there are no black borders visible. You can mess with the motion of the camera shake if you want. I usually keep mine on custom. Boolean image rotation is an interesting effect for creating rotation effects. As a post-process effect, it can affect everything beneath it, or if you toggle the image source option, you can limit it to your loaded image source. You can move the origin of your image and the preview origin, yes, spelled like that, to view where your origin point is. You can move the rotate slider to have the rotation effect happen on its own, or automate the angle slider to manually rotate your image. You can also change the size of the image here with the size parameter. The fill type setting determines how the outskirts of the image past the frame of the image is filled in. Boolean kaleidoscope takes your background and creates a moving kaleidoscope effect with it. To make it move, you can set the bottom 5 parameters to your liking. You can also change the type parameter to change the type of kaleidoscope effect you want. Alternatively, the angle and size sliders can be moved or automated for a manual take. Boolean motion blur is a simple motion blur effect you can add to some of your moving elements in buffer layers to isolate the effect to them, or if you want it on your entire video, you can do that as well. Boolean pixelate is a mosaic sensor effect or a pixelated effect, whatever you want to call it. You can use an image source as a mask, but I'd recommend using the effect in buffer layers for more support. If you'd like to see a short video walking you through how to do that, let me know in the comments. The vignette video I plan to post later on I don't imagine being very long, so short tutorial videos I know most people are more likely to watch, unlike this video, but being that I'm covering the basics, I hoped to cover everything in detail. Man, that I bite off more than I can chew with this. But at least that's it for the post-process effects. Now we're in the home straight. You'll soon see why. The scenes category is largely self-explanatory. They are all 3D CG environments with customizable parameters. Pretty neat stuff, but I imagine, as such, they might be quite taxing on lower-end computers and laptops, so be careful when looking through these. Since these are all the same general concept, I'm not going to cover these in detail. I'm just going to scroll through them so that you can see the variety of scenes available and the parameters for them. Next is the terrain category. The terrain category is largely the same, scrolling environments with some customization options. I'll scroll through these quickly so that you can see them and then point out any interesting features about them. Abstract plane. You can load your own image source to replace the texture on the ground. Cubes and spheres is an audio reactive effect. Change the sound influence slider to change how much the effect reacts to the audio. Desert sand? It sure is. Dry rocky gorge? Yep. Goop flow? I don't know why it's white to start off with, but just don't think about it too much. You can change the flow speed slider to make it start moving. You can also replace it with your own custom image source. Jagged plane? It sure is. Plane, that is. You can load your own image source as well. Perturbed grid? Terraced hills? Pretty neat. Terrain lattice? Nice. And lastly, Weave's 3D Truchet. A pretty busy one in my opinion to end this category on. We're at the last 3 effects now, finally. The next category, however, is text, which I believe I went into at length at the start of this video, so we'll move on. I don't think I missed anything there. The time indicators category currently consists of 2 effects that you can use to display the elapsed time of your project's total length. Boolean time bar is your standard line, or bar I guess, that fills through the progress of the project's runtime. There are 3 recoloring options here. The fill line, L, the indicator circle, C, and the empty baseline, B. You can disable the baseline with disable base, disable the fill line with disable line, and you can change the size of the circle with circle size. Lowering it to minimum will make it disappear. If you increase the line width, the effects of the line cap toggle become more obvious. If you wanted to increase the width of just the baseline and not the fill line, there's width asymmetrical. And if you prefer a circular timeline, you can toggle circle mode. Something I would like to see added to this effect, if for some reason anyone at ImageLine or any of the contributors to ZGame Editor Visualizer are watching, I'd like to see the ability to add a custom image as the circle. Obviously, paws are my whole thing. I'd like to be able to use a paw print as my time indicator. Maybe even give it a little rotation so that's more interesting or something, but that's just me. The next effect, HUD text, Boolean timestamp. Genuinely, when I was writing this script, I almost typed HUD text instinctively, but I decided to keep that in. Why? Well, if you look at this effect, you might notice some similarities to that effect. Some differences as well. It's almost like they copy and pasted this effect over. But they wouldn't have done that, right? What does the help mean, you say? Oh, I see. Well, that's fine. Since this is the exact same as the HUD text, I'll just point out the differences. As you can see, this effect creates a clock that will indicate the progress of time through your project. By default, the time type starts on position only, where it displays the elapsed time or the current progress of time. You can change it to length only so that it will display the total length of the project. Say if you want to use this effect in conjunction with Boolean time bar, you can have the position on the left or maybe automate it to follow the circle, and then you have another Boolean timestamp to have the total length of the song on the right. Or if you'd prefer something simpler, you can use whole1 or whole2, which displays both the position time and the length time, one with a hyphen and one with a // Again, something I would like to see added to this clone of HUD text to make it more interesting is the option for a custom image source, or mesh even, to use as the separator between the two time indicators. I guess I could just use two Eulian timestamp effects with an image effect in the center to recreate that effect. Also, since this is just the HUD text framework, you can load in a custom font from your list of fonts that you may or may not have added back when we discussed HUD text. The last category is Tunnel, which is another collection of fly-through environments, this time more centered around, well, centering the frame into a tunnel-like view. We'll just speed through these as per usual. 3D cellular tiling, nice. Abstract corridor, you can change the general shape of the walls as well as the texture of them and the ground with an image source. It loads each texture in sequence. The first image is the wall, the next image is the ground. Abstract glassy field, you can change the camera path with cam path, make the field more disconnected with the blobs toggle, and you can load your own custom image source for the material texture. Abstract Island Cavern, pretty cool. I thought the straight toggle changed the path of the camera, but it doesn't seem to do anything. Abstract Water Tunnel, pretty neat. Can someone make a version of this, but it's the back rooms? I would like to see the ability to change the scenes to the different floors, so the fly-through would be the regular back rooms, the pools, the malls, and whatever other ones there are that I don't really know. I think that would be cool. Oh geez, Apollonian structure. Looks like something you might find in No Man's Sky on one of the interesting special planets. Biomine, very mystery flesh pit, or maybe Jimmy Neutron's brain blast effect. Canyon Pass, Textury. There's the look down slider, which does in fact make the camera look down, but it's a bit of a slippery slider. Cave entrance.
Okay, I believe you.
Cellular lattice, science-y. The volume slider iterates the cellular structure. Cellular tile tunnel 2. I don't get it, I didn't watch the first one. This effect has a subsurface scattering slider, which I guess things other than skin do have. Cellular tile tunnel. Oh, here's the first part of the series. Oh, and this version lets you use your own custom image source. Man, the first in the series really is always better, isn't it? Cubic Truchet pattern. P5 and P6 sliders do not do anything that I've noticed. Also, if you're as confused as I was, here's what a Truchet pattern is. Desert Canyon. Whoa, look at that repeating sand texture. Not really much of a tunnel effect, only sometimes. Desert Passage, very nice. Dual 3D Truchet tiles. Aren't you glad I informed you on what Truchet tiles were? Entangled Vines.
Okay, I believe you.
Forward Fall. Ooh, pretty simple. You can load an image source and a mesh, interesting. The image replaces the texture of the object, even if you replace the object with a custom mesh. The effect also is somewhat audio reactive. Peak amount, yes, spelled like that, can be increased to increase what I call the spaz level, because I mean, wow. Fractal fly-through, sleek. Full scene radio blur, golly. And if you set an image source, it changes the material of the terrain and can make it way brighter. Industrial tunnel, whoa, fancy. KIF's fly-through. If I'm not mistaken, that's kaleidoscopic iterated function system, so that's neat. Lattice framework, yep. Lava tubes, kinda die in lava. You can fully snuff out the lava if you turn the saturation down. Luminescent tiles, interesting. You can also use your own image source. Maze lattice, retro. Menger sponge, Menger sponge variation. Oh, I'm so ready. Menger variation 2, one of those sequels where the title is slightly different, I guess. Mountain path, reminds me a bit of Spyro. Oblivion, oh jeez, holy shit, that escalated quickly. At least this one tells you sort of that the hue, saturation, and lightness don't do anything. Old school tube for that early 2000s vibe. Panel tube, ooh, neat. Random block passage for your Minecraft remixes. Steel lattice. I wish that red hue wasn't there so that it could appear more actually steel. Turning down the lightness fixes that a little bit. Subterranean fly-through. Kinda like the one with the ship, but less detailed. You can also use an image source. Tourist journey is pretty cool, also audio reactive. Traced Minkowski tube, make it more yellow to look like it's made of beehive. Transparent cube field, very nice, very cool. I might use this one someday, if I remember. Twisted geometry, the fanciest, more regal twisted geometry I've seen. Twisted tubes. Now I want a fly-through animation of the old Windows 3D pipe screensaver. Underground passageway. Use some color grading to make this look spookier. Voxel corridor. Oh, this one is for your Minecraft remixes. Haha. You can use the image source to set the color of the reflections, I think. Oh no, it does change the texture of the walls and floor. You just need to increase the texture scale. Voxel fly-through for your remixes of the Aether 2 mod music. Winding Menger tunnel, like this one with the little displays on the sides. Again, personally, I wish this one allowed you to use an image source to replace those screen things. Now that would be cool. And lastly is Julian tunnel, which is a pretty stark contrast to the other ones we've been seeing. Default is these hexagonal rings. You can change that with the source option to uniform triangle, rectangle, hexagon, and circle. You'll notice that by default it's set to image. If you load a custom image source, you'll get some really psychedelic effects. If you want to make it even more trippy, you can change the rotation slider. It'll create a rotational smear effect. If you want it to look even more dramatic, you can increase the element slider. The master rotation slider is your standard rotation parameter that rotates the effect but doesn't really do anything else but rotate the entire effect. If you want manual control over the rotation, use the angle slider, which I would personally recommend because, as has been my pet peeve with a lot of effects here, neither the rotation nor master rotation sliders reset the rotation on the image when cleared. They just stop wherever they are at the moment. If you want a slightly different effect, you can turn on the ortho mode for an oddly orthographic view of the effect. I'll leave the other parameters for you to discover what they do, because with that, we are done with the effects! Man, did that take so much longer than I anticipated. I'd underestimated just how many effects ZGame Editor Visualizer has, but we're almost done with the first video in this series. To think I have a few more videos I need to make after this. But hopefully those won't be nearly as long. But before I end this video, I have to show you the culmination of everything we've discussed today. In my script, I'm writing that this is the improvisation portion of the script, because as much as I would like to plan what type of video I want to make, I think it'll just be easier if I just actually do it here and leave it up to my inspiration. Here it goes.
Here we go. You're getting on. That's all there is to it.
And there you have it. A finished video. More or less. Not my best work, mind you, but this was just an extremely rough, basic example as to what you can create in ZGame Editor Visualizer, and I tried to incorporate some new things that I covered in this video as well. Well, that should be everything for the basics. If you stuck throughout the entirety of this video, more power to you. And thank you. I've never made a video of this style before, so just writing the script for me was a slog. 53 pages and 36,430 words. I really hope you all found it useful, and new and/or frequent FL Studio users learned something new somewhere. Stay tuned for the next video in this ZGame Editor Visualizer tutorial series, where I will take a deeper look at the Video Wizard. I've never used that before, so it will be a learning experience for us both. But I'll have the benefit of learning how it works as I write the script so that I can explain what's happening. I expect that to be a shorter video. If you are interested in that video, then check out the one immediately after that. I'll be covering buffer layers extensively, as I want to make sure to discuss that in detail early on, since those are incredibly useful. When you're ready to export it, just press the Export Video button and the Video Export Settings window will pop up. This window should be, and I know I said this a lot in this video, pretty self-explanatory. At the top is the address bar where FL Studio will save your video to, or you can press the Browse button to open your file explorer and pick a folder for it to save to. You can also rename your video file there if you want. Here is a drop-down menu of video format templates for quick and simple video export settings to specific platforms, which you can also see in these previews here. You can open this section here to view the advanced export settings, where you can change specific settings as you wish. The resolution and frames per second, which you can right-click to set custom ones not available in the drop-down menus, video bitrate and video codec, whether you want to export an uncompressed video file or if you want to super sample your video by 2 times, your audio codec and your audio bitrate, and if you want to use the final post-master audio. Honestly, I have not experimented with these settings in depth, so I cannot really tell you what they do, and as I was writing the script, I completely forgot to cover the video export settings window as I had promised at the beginning of this video, so I'm actually adding this part right at the very end of this video's production. Because professionalism. Lastly, ZGame Editor Visualizer itemizes all of your plugins and effects that you used for that video so that you can give proper credit to the authors who made them in the description of your video. And you can easily copy the section by clicking the Copy to Clipboard button here. Additionally, make sure you're putting this in your videos so that other musicians can find your videos and draw inspiration from them. While working on this project, I actually found a couple people using some of the effects that I was otherwise unsure how anyone would use them in a music visualizer, and found them being used rather creatively. Share the inspiration. But for now, thank you all so much for watching. If you liked this video or found it useful in any way, liking this video is the easiest way to let me know that. If you've seen more informative videos, or you just didn't like my stupid script writing, or you just didn't like this video for any reason, you can dislike it. No, it's fine. Really. Go ahead. I'll be fine. And be sure to subscribe so that you can kind of sort of sometimes be notified more or less of my next uploads around the time when they happen. You can blame YouTube for that. I'm Ulrich, and this has been Day Music. See you next time.